Three Apache women swayed from ropes at the ranch gate, their feet barely scraping the dust. Ethan Carver had bought this godforsaken Arizona land for $35 seeking solitude, but instead found himself cutting down bodies that were somehow still breathing. As he lowered the youngest sister to the ground, her eyes fluttered open and she whispered a single word that changed everything. They're coming. What started as a bargain purchase had just become a death sentence. Stay with me to discover how one man's search for peace became a brutal fight for survival in the unforgiving desert. Drop a comment about where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story has traveled. The Arizona sun hung like a brass medallion in the cloudless sky, bearing down on the lone rider as he navigated the rocky trail toward what he hoped would be his sanctuary. Ethan Carver had ridden for 3 days from Tucson following a hand-drawn map that led to the cheapest piece of land in the territory, $35 for 40 acres of scrubland that nobody else wanted. The deed crinkled in his shirt pocket with each movement of his horse, a constant reminder of the new beginning he'd purchased with the last of his savings. The war had taken everything from him, his brothers at Antietam, his father, to grief his mother, to consumption. The family farm in Missouri had been sold to pay debts, leaving Ethan with nothing but memories of cannon fire and the faces of dying men. He drifted west like so many other broken soldiers working cattle drives and mining camps, saving every penny for this moment. Land of his own. A place where the nightmares might finally stop. "Easy, Bishop," he murmured to his bay gelding as they crested the final ridge. The horse snorted, ears pricked forward with sudden tension. Ethan's hand instinctively moved to the Winchester in his saddle scabbard as he surveyed his new property spread out below. The ranch house stood like a weathered tombstone against the red earth, its adobe walls cracked but solid. A windmill creaked in the desert breeze and a small corral held promise of livestock to come. But it was the sight at the front gate that made his blood run cold. 3 figures hung from the wooden crossbeam, their bodies turning slowly in the wind. "Jesus Christ," Ethan breathed, spurring Bishop down the slope. As he drew closer, details emerged that made his stomach clench. They were women, Apache by their dress, and impossibly unbelievably their feet were moving. Barely touching the ground, they stood on tiptoes, the ropes tight around their necks, but not yet tight enough to kill. Ethan leaped from his horse before it had fully stopped pulling his knife as he ran. The first woman was the oldest, perhaps 35, her face purple with strain, but her dark eyes still fierce with life. He wrapped one arm around her waist, lifting her weight off the rope, while sawing through the hemp above her head. "Hold on," he grunted as the rope parted and she collapsed against him. He lowered her gently to the ground where she gasped and coughed, her hands clawing at the noose still around her neck. The second woman looked to be in her 20s, unconscious, but breathing in shallow, desperate pulls. Ethan cut her down quickly, his arms burning from the effort of supporting dead weight. The third was youngest, maybe 18, and as he lifted her, her eyes opened deep brown pools filled with terror and something else. Recognition. "They're coming," she whispered through cracked lips, her voice barely audible. "You have to run." "Who's coming?" Ethan asked, but she had already passed out. He laid her beside her sisters and ran to his saddlebags for his canteen. The oldest woman grabbed his wrist as he knelt beside her, her grip surprisingly strong. "Why," she croaked, her voice raw from the rope, "why save us?" "Because I'm not an animal," Ethan replied, helping her drink. "Can you walk? We need to get you inside." She nodded, struggling to her feet with his help. Together they managed to carry the younger women into the ranch house. The interior was sparse but clean. A previous owner had left basic furniture, including a bed and a worn settee. They laid the unconscious women down carefully. "I'm Ethan Carver," he said, returning with more water and what medical supplies he had. "This is my land. At least I bought it 3 days ago." The older woman studied him with calculating eyes. "I am Nayeli. These are my sisters Soha and Tiva." She accepted the water, gratefully wincing as she swallowed. "Your land. You bought, Death White Man." "I bought 40 acres of scrub for $35, Ethan corrected, checking Soha's pulse. It was weak, but steady. "Nobody mentioned it came with attempted murder. Naeli laughed bitterly. $35. They sold you our blood for $35. Before Ethan could ask what she meant, the sound of approaching horses filled the air, many horses moving fast. Naeli's face went pale beneath her bronze skin. "They're here," she whispered. "The Harrigans. You should have let us die." Ethan moved to the window, peering through the dusty glass. 8 riders were approaching, armed and arranged in a semicircle as they neared the gate. The lead rider was a bear of a man with a gray-streaked beard and cold eyes that Ethan could see even from a distance. "Stay here," he told Naeli, checking the loads in his Winchester. "Keep your sisters quiet." He stepped onto the porch rifle held casually but ready. The riders stopped just outside the gate where the hanging ropes still swayed. The leader, this had to be Harrigan, smiled without warmth. "You'd be the new owner," the man called out. His voice carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Name's Cole Harrigan. I own the Double H ranch that borders your property." "Ethan Carver," Ethan replied evenly. "And I know who you are. Your calling card was hanging from my gate." Harrigan's smile widened. "Those Apache thieves, they've been stealing from decent folks for months. We caught them red-handed on my land, hung them as a warning to others." "On my land," Ethan emphasized, "and they're still breathing, so attempted murder is what I'd call it." A younger rider beside Harrigan, lean and dangerous-looking with pale eyes, spoke up. "Those savages are ours, mister. Hand them over, and we'll be on our way." "Don't recall catching your name," Ethan said. "Silas Crowley," the man replied, his hand resting on his pistol. "Mr. Harrigan's foreman." "Well, Mr. Crowley, those women are under my protection now. They're hurt, and they're staying put." The riders exchanged glances, some amused, others hostile. Harrigan leaned forward in his saddle. "Son, you don't know what you're stepping into. Those Apache bitches know things, important things, things that don't concern you." "Everything on my land concerns me," Ethan said. "Now I'd appreciate it if you'd move along. It's been a long day." Harrigan's face darkened. "You're new here, so I'll give you one chance. Those women have information that belongs to me. My men will be back tomorrow at noon. Have them ready or things will get unpleasant." "That sounds like a threat." "It's a promise." Crowley interjected, his pale eyes glittering. "This desert has a way of swallowing up folks who don't know their place." Ethan shifted his rifle slightly, not quite pointing it, but making his readiness clear. "I spent 4 years in the war, Mr. Crowley. I've seen scarier men than you die choking on their own blood. Now get off my land." For a moment, violence hung in the air like dust before a storm. Then Harrigan laughed, a sound like grinding stone. "You've got balls, Carver. Stupid, but balls nonetheless. We'll see you tomorrow." They wheeled their horses and rode off, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Ethan watched until they disappeared over the ridge, then went back inside. Naeli had managed to rouse her sisters, and all 3 women stared at him with a mixture of gratitude and fear. "You don't know what you've done," Naeli said. "Harrigan will kill you for this." "Maybe," Ethan admitted, pulling up a chair, "but first you're going to tell me what this is really about. What information does Harrigan want?" The sisters exchanged glances, conducting a silent conversation. Finally, Naeli nodded to the others and began to speak. "Our people lived on this land for generations, long before any white settlers came. This ranch your ranch sits on what was once our village. There's something here Harrigan wants, something our father died protecting." "Gold," Ethan guessed. Tiva, the youngest, shook her head. "Water. Deep underground, a river that never runs dry. In this desert, it's worth more than all the gold in California." "Our father was the keeper of the knowledge," Soha added, her voice still hoarse. "He knew the exact location, the way to access it. When he saw what was coming, the settlers, the soldiers, he divided the knowledge among us. Each of us carries part of the secret. Harrigan's family killed our people to take this land." Naeli continued, her voice heavy with old pain. "But they never found the water. They've been searching for 20 years. When they learned we were still alive, that we carried our father's knowledge." "They've been hunting you," Ethan finished. "For 3 years, Tiva confirmed. "We kept moving, staying with different bands, but they finally caught us yesterday. They tortured us, but we told them nothing." "So they hung you as bait," Ethan reasoned. "Figured someone would cut you down, give them another chance to interrogate you." Naeli nodded grimly. or they hoped the near death would break us. Harrigan is patient. He can afford to be. He owns half the county. Ethan stood and paced to the window, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. How many men does he have? 20, maybe Sitashi 25, but Ashai, Soha answered. Plus Crowley. That one is a killer. He's fast with a gun and likes using it. And the law? The sisters laughed bitterly in unison. Sheriff Daniels is Harrigan's cousin, Naeli explained. The judge owes him money. There is no law here except what Harrigan makes. Ethan considered his options. He could hand the women over, preserve his new start. It would be the smart thing to do, the safe thing. But as he looked at their faces, proud despite their suffering, defiant despite their fear, he knew that wasn't really an option at all. He'd seen too much injustice in the war to stomach more of it now. All right, he said finally. You'll stay here. We'll figure out the rest as we go. You're a fool, Naeli said, but there was respect in her voice. Harrigan will burn this place to the ground with you in it. Maybe, Ethan admitted, but I didn't survive Gettysburg to run from a land thief and his hired guns. Besides, he added with a grim smile, I paid $35 for this place. I intend to get my money's worth. That night, Ethan barely slept. He'd barricaded the doors and windows, loaded every weapon he could find, his Winchester and old shotgun left by the previous owner, his Army Colt. The sisters took turns keeping watch despite their injuries, their eyes sharp in the darkness. Around midnight, Bishop whinnied nervously in the corral. Ethan crept to a window and peered out. Nothing moved in the moonlight, but the horse's ears were pinned back, nostrils flared. Something was out there. They're testing us, Naeli whispered beside him. She'd moved so quietly he hadn't heard her approach. Harrigan likes to know his enemy before he strikes. A shadow detached itself from the larger darkness near the well, then another by the corral. Ethan counted at least 3 men, possibly more, circling the property like wolves. Should we shoot? Tiva asked from her position by another window. No, Ethan decided. They're trying to provoke us, make us waste ammunition, or reveal our positions. Let them look. For an hour, the shadows prowled. Then, as suddenly as they'd appeared, they melted back into the desert night. Bishop slowly calmed, though he remained alert. They'll know the layout now, Soha observed. Every door, every window. Let them, Ethan said. Knowledge of the battlefield is only useful if you know how your enemy will use it. Dawn came slowly, painting the desert in shades of rose and gold. Ethan made coffee and breakfast from his supplies, bacon, beans, and hard biscuits. The sisters ate gratefully, their strength returning with each hour of rest. Tell me about the water, Ethan said as they ate. Not the location, keep that to yourselves. But how much are we talking about? Enough to irrigate 1,000 acres, Naeli replied. Enough to turn this desert into paradise. Our people used it sparingly, taking only what we needed. But Harrigan, he would drain it dry in a decade, selling it to the highest bidder. There's something else, Tiva added quietly. The water is sacred to us. It's where we buried our ancestors, where we performed our ceremonies. Harrigan's already destroyed so much. We can't let him take this too. Ethan understood. This wasn't just about water or land. It was about identity heritage, the last connection to a vanishing world. He'd seen the same story play out across the frontier native peoples, pushed aside for profit and progress. What if we made a deal, he suggested. Share the water, set up some kind of partnership. Naeli's face hardened. Would you partner with the man who murdered your family, who burned your home and scattered your people to the wind? There can be no peace with Harrigan, only victory or death. Before Ethan could respond, the sound of approaching horses filled the air again. This time, it wasn't 8 riders, but closer to 20. They spread out in a long line, blocking any escape route. Harrigan rode at the center, Crowley at his right hand. It's noon, Carver, Harrigan called out. Time to make your choice. Ethan stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. The sisters remained inside, but visible through the windows, their own weapons ready. I've made my choice, Ethan replied. These women are under my protection. You want them, you'll have to go through me. Harrigan sighed theatrically. I was hoping you'd be reasonable. Silas? Crowley dismounted smoothly, his hand hovering over his pistol. Mr. Carver, I'm calling you out, man to man. You win, we leave. I win, we take the Apache women. And if I refuse, then we burn the place down around your ears, Crowley said simply. Your choice. Ethan studied the gunman. Crowley was younger, probably faster, certainly more practiced at this kind of killing, but Ethan had learned long ago that speed wasn't everything in a gunfight. Survival often came down to who wanted it more. All right, Ethan said, setting his rifle aside, but not here. The flat ground by the well. And if your men interfere, my friends inside will start shooting. Fair enough, Crowley agreed, already walking toward the designated spot. Ethan descended the porch steps, his hand resting on his Colt's grip. The sun was directly overhead, eliminating any advantage from glare. The packed earth by the well was smooth with no rocks or holes to trip on. As good a place to die as any, he supposed. They faced each other at 15 paces. Crowley's pale eyes were utterly calm like a snake's before it strikes. Around them, Harrigan's men watched with eager anticipation. From the house, Ethan felt the sister's eyes on him. When you're ready, gentlemen, Harrigan called out. Time slowed. Ethan saw Crowley's shoulder dip slightly, the telltale sign of a draw. His own hand moved muscle memory from countless hours of practice during the war. The Colt cleared leather just as Crowley's gun came up. 2 shots cracked across the desert so close together they sounded like one. Crowley's bullet tugged at Ethan's shirt, burning a line across his ribs. Ethan's shot took the gunman in the chest, spinning him around before he collapsed to his knees. Crowley looked down at the spreading red stain on his shirt with genuine surprise. Well, damn, he muttered, then fell face first into the dust. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Harrigan's men reached for their weapons, but Harrigan himself raised a hand, stopping them. A deal's a deal, he said, though his face was dark with rage. But this isn't over Carver, not by a long shot. You've killed my best man. That demands satisfaction. He called me out, Ethan replied, his Colt still in his hand. Fair fight, your men witnessed it. Fair or not, blood demands blood, Harrigan said. You've got 1 week. Then I'm coming back and I won't be offering any more deals. 1 week to hand over those savages, or I'll see you and them burned alive. They collected Crowley's body and rode off, leaving Ethan standing by the well, blood seeping through his shirt where the bullet had grazed him. Naeli emerged from the house and helped him inside. You're lucky, she said, cleaning the wound. An inch to the left and you'd be dead. Story of my life, Ethan muttered. An inch here, an inch there. And somehow I keep breathing while better men die. You're a good shot, Soha observed. Where did you learn? The war. I was a sharpshooter for the Union. Spent most of my time trying not to hit anything vital, truth be told. Got sick of killing boys who should have been home helping with the harvest. Yet you killed Crowley without hesitation, Tiva noted. He made his choice, Ethan replied, just like I made mine. That night they made plans. A week wasn't much time, but it was something. Ethan rode to the nearest town, a dusty collection of buildings called Covenant, to buy supplies and ammunition. The general store owner, a nervous man named Paulson, was reluctant to sell to him. Word is you're harboring those Apache women, Paulson said, glancing around nervously. Harrigan's put the word out. Anyone who helps you is his enemy. I've got cash money, Ethan said, placing coins on the counter. You can say I robbed you if it makes you feel better. Paulson sighed, but took the money. As Ethan loaded his purchases, the store owner leaned close. There's a federal marshal sometimes comes through, name of Grant Ellery. He's due in a few days making his circuit. He's the only law around here that Harrigan doesn't own. Federal marshal won't care about a local land dispute, Ethan pointed out. Maybe not, Paulson agreed. But he might care about the massacre at Burden Creek. That's what they call the place where Harrigan killed the Apache band. Happened on federal land, technically. The Indians were under treaty protection. How do you know about this? Paulson glanced around again. I keep the books for half the ranches around here, including Harrigan's when his regular man is drunk, which is often. I've seen things. Receipts for ammunition before the massacre, payment records to men who weren't regular hands. Harrigan was careful, but not careful enough. Why are you telling me this? Because Crowley killed my brother 2 years ago. Shot him down for looking at a saloon girl Crowley fancied. Harrigan made sure there were no witnesses when it came to trial. Paulson pulled out a leather ledger from under the counter. This is a copy of Harrigan's books from that time. The original's in his safe, but this might be enough to interest a federal marshal. Ethan took the ledger, understanding the risk Paulson was taking. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just make sure Harrigan pays for what he's done. Back at the ranch, Ethan showed the sisters what he'd learned. Nayeli studied the ledger with growing excitement. These names, she said, pointing to a list. Some of these men, we knew them. They traded with our people before they turned. Harrigan paid them to scout our village to count our warriors. It's evidence, Ethan said. Maybe enough to bring in federal help. If the marshal comes, Soha said doubtfully, and if he cares, and if he arrives before Harrigan attacks. It's a lot of ifs, Ethan admitted, but it's something. They spent the next days preparing. The sisters, despite their injuries, proved remarkably capable. They knew the desert, knew how to fight, knew how to survive. They showed Ethan hidden approaches to the ranch blind spots in the defenses, places where the land itself could be used as a weapon. Here, Nayeli pointed to a cluster of rocks on a ridge overlooking the house. A rifleman there could cover the entire front approach. And here, Tiva indicated a dry wash that ran behind the property. Harrigan's men will think to use it for cover, but flash floods have undercut the banks. One good kick and tons of rock would come down. They worked tirelessly, setting up defensive positions, storing water and ammunition, preparing for siege. On the third night, as they sat around the table cleaning weapons, Soha began to sing a low, mournful Apache song that made the hair on Ethan's neck stand up. It's a death song, Nayeli explained. Warriors sing it before battle when they don't expect to survive. We'll survive, Ethan said firmly. All of us. You don't have to die for us, Tiva said quietly. This isn't your fight. You could still leave. Yes, it is my fight, Ethan replied. The moment I cut you down from those ropes, it became my fight. Maybe even before that. Maybe it became my fight the moment I decided I was tired of seeing the strong prey on the weak. You're 1 man against 20, Nayeli pointed out. I've faced worse odds, and I'm not alone. I've got 3 Apache warriors with me. The sisters exchanged glances. Then Nayeli smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. Yes, you do. On the 5th day, unexpected visitors arrived. Not Harrigan's men, but a small party of Apache riders. They stopped at a respectful distance, one rider advancing with a white flag. It was an older man with a face carved by wind and time. I am Joseph Crow Feather, he announced. I come to speak with my cousins. The sisters emerged and there was a rapid exchange in Apache. Then Nayeli turned to Ethan. He's from the reservation. He's heard about what happened. He wants to help. Harrigan won't hesitate to kill reservation Indians, Ethan warned. Crow Feather spoke in accented but clear English. Harrigan has killed too many of our people already. We may live on the white man's reservation, but we are still warriors. My cousins are the last of the Burden Creek band. We will not let them stand alone. How many men do you have? Ethan asked. 6 who can fight. More who can watch and send word if Harrigan moves. It's dangerous. The federal government won't protect you if you're caught fighting white settlers. Crow Feather smiled grimly. The federal government doesn't protect us anyway. At least this way we die for something worthwhile. They set up camp in the rocks above the ranch, hidden positions where they could provide covering fire. 7 Apache warriors and 1 former Union soldier against Harrigan's 20-plus gunmen. The odds were still terrible, but they were better than they had been. On the 6th night, things went wrong. Ethan woke to Bishop's frantic neighing and the smell of smoke. The barn was on fire, flames already licking at the roof. He ran outside in his long johns and boots, grabbing a bucket, but it was already too late. The structure was fully engulfed. Let it burn, Nayeli called from the porch. It's a diversion. They're coming from the other side. Sure enough, riders appeared from the east, their shapes barely visible in the dancing firelight. But these weren't attacking. They were setting up position siege lines. Harrigan was early. So much for a week, Ethan muttered. A voice called out from the darkness. Harrigan himself. Sorry to cut our deadline short, Carver, but I heard you've been making friends. Can't have the reservation Indians getting involved in our business. So here's the new deal. Send out the women now, and you and your Apache friends can ride away. Otherwise, when the sun comes up, we start shooting. Ethan looked at the sisters. They stood ready, weapons in hand, faces set with determination. "What's your answer?" he asked them. "The same as yours, I think," Naeli replied. Ethan cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted back, "Harrigan, come and take them!" The response was a volley of gunfire that shattered windows and chipped adobe from the walls. The siege had begun. They fought through the night, trading shots with shadows. The Apache warriors in the rocks picked off 2 of Harrigan's men who got too eager, ventured too close. But ammunition was limited, and every shot had to count. As dawn approached, Tiva grabbed Ethan's arm. "There's something we haven't told you about the water. This really isn't the time." "It is exactly the time," she insisted. "If we die, the secret dies with us, but you've earned the right to know." She pulled out a piece of deerskin with symbols drawn on it. "This is my part, the depth and direction." She showed him how to read the markers, made him memorize them. Soha did the same with her piece, the surface landmarks that marked the spot. Naeli hesitated, then shared hers, the method to access the underground river, the ancient engineering their people had used. "Now you know everything," Naeli said. "If we fall, we won't fall." Ethan interrupted, but he memorized every detail anyway. The sun rose like a furnace, turning the desert into a killing field. Harrigan's men had good positions, plenty of ammunition. They kept up steady fire, trying to pin down the defenders while others crept closer. Then, unexpected hope dust on the horizon. A lone rider approaching under a badge that caught the morning light, the Federal Marshal Paulson had mentioned. Grant Ellery was a tall, weathered man with careful eyes and a reputation for stubbornness. "What's all this shooting about?" he called out, stopping between the 2 forces. "Federal business, Marshal," Harrigan replied, emerging from cover. "These Apache murdered 3 of my men. We're bringing them to justice." "Funny how your justice involves shooting up a white man's legally purchased property," Ellery observed, "and I count at least 8 Apache warriors in those rocks who might disagree with your version of events." "They're harboring fugitives," Harrigan insisted. "From what I hear, the only fugitives here are the men who massacred a protected Apache band at Burden Creek," Ellery said. His voice carried clearly in the morning air. "That's federal land, Harrigan. Those Indians were under treaty protection. Their murder is my jurisdiction." "You can't prove anything," Harrigan snarled. "Actually," Ethan called out, "we can." He held up Paulson's ledger. "Complete records of payments to scouts and gunmen before the massacre. Names, dates, amounts." Ellery rode closer to the house. "That true, you have evidence, documented proof," Ethan confirmed, "and 3 witnesses who survived the massacre." The federal marshal turned back to Harrigan. "Call off your men. This is now a federal investigation." For a moment, violence trembled on the edge of erupting. Harrigan's men looked to their boss, fingers on triggers. Then slowly, Harrigan raised his hand. "Stand down, boys," he said, his voice thick with rage. "The marshal wants to investigate. Let him investigate. But this isn't over." His men withdrew, mounting their horses and riding away in a cloud of dust and muttered curses. Harrigan himself was the last to go, pointing a finger at Ethan like a promise of doom. Marshal Ellery dismounted and approached the house. The sisters emerged cautiously, Crowfeather and his warriors descending from their positions. "I'll need to see that evidence," Ellery said, "and take statements from the witnesses." "You'll help us?" Naeli asked, disbelief clear in her voice. "The law is the law," Ellery replied. "It's supposed to protect everyone, not just the rich and white. I know that's not always how it works, but it's how it should work. And I'll be damned if I let a massacre on federal land go unpunished on my watch." They spent hours going through the ledger, taking statements, building a case. Ellery was thorough, professional, and surprisingly sympathetic. He'd seen too much injustice on the frontier to be shocked by Harrigan's crimes. "This is enough to arrest him," Ellery concluded, "but I'll need backup from Fort Buchanan. Harrigan has too many men for me to take alone. Can you hold out for 3 more days?" "We've made it this far," Ethan said. But Harrigan wasn't done. That night, as Ellery camped nearby, preparing to ride for reinforcements at dawn, sabotage struck. The well, their crucial water supply, had been poisoned. They discovered it when Bishop refused to drink, backing away from the trough with foam on his lips. "Dead cattle upstream," Crowfeather reported after investigating. "Thrown in during the night. The water won't be safe for days." They had maybe 2 days of stored water, 3 if they rationed carefully. In the desert heat with Harrigan's men likely watching every move, it wasn't enough. He's trying to force us out, Soha said. Make us desperate. Or make us use the hidden water, Nayeli added quietly. He knows we won't let everyone die of thirst. He's trying to force us to reveal the location. It was a clever trap. But Ethan had learned something about traps during the war. Sometimes the only way out was through. Marshal, he said to Ellery, how fast can you ride? Fast as I need to. Then ride now. Don't wait for dawn. Take my horse Bishop's the fastest in 3 counties. Get to Fort Buchanan and back as quick as you can. Ellery understood. Every hour counted now. He mounted Bishop and disappeared into the darkness, riding hard for help that might come too late. The next day was torture. The sun seemed hotter, the air drier. They rationed water carefully, but throats still burned and lips cracked. Harrigan's men appeared on the ridges, not attacking but watching, waiting for desperation to do their work for them. We could access the hidden water, Tiva suggested, her voice hoarse. Just enough to survive. The moment we do, Harrigan will know, Ethan replied. He'll attack immediately before help can arrive. Then what do we do? Soha asked. Ethan looked at the assembled defenders, 3 Apache sisters, 6 reservation warriors, all suffering from thirst, but still proud, still strong. We make Harrigan think he's won. That night, Ethan built a large fire in front of the house, making sure Harrigan's watchers could see. Then with great theatrics, he and the sisters appeared to argue. Nayeli stormed off toward the rocks. Soha followed. Finally, Tiva, after much apparent pleading from Ethan, also left. To anyone watching, it looked like the Apache women had abandoned the white man who'd tried to protect them. In reality, they circled back in the darkness, taking positions around the ranch. Crowfeather's warriors did the same, creating a hidden perimeter. Then they waited. Harrigan took the bait. Just before dawn, when defenders would be most tired and visibility poorest, his men moved in. 15 riders approached the seemingly abandoned ranch, confident in their victory. Carver, Harrigan called out. I know you're in there, probably dying of thirst. The Apache bitches ran out on you, didn't they? Come out and I'll give you water. Hell, I'll even let you leave alive. Ethan stepped onto the porch, apparently alone, apparently defeated. What do you want, Harrigan? You know what I want. Where did the women go? Which direction? North. Ethan lied. Toward the reservation. Harrigan smiled. Good. Then you won't mind if we search your property. Make sure they didn't leave anything useful behind. His men dismounted, spreading out to search the grounds. It was exactly what Ethan had hoped for. Separated overconfident, they made perfect targets. Now, Ethan said quietly. The night erupted. The hidden defenders opened fire from multiple angles, catching Harrigan's men in a deadly crossfire. 3 went down immediately. Others scrambled for cover that wasn't there, the flat ground around the ranch house offering no protection. Harrigan himself dove behind the well, shooting back with his rifle. You son of a bitch! You set us up. Just returning the favor, Ethan called back, firing from the window. The battle was brief but vicious. Harrigan's men, caught completely off guard, tried to reach their horses. 2 made it riding hard into the desert. 3 more surrendered, throwing down their weapons. The rest, including 2 who'd been particularly brutal to the sisters, lay still in the dust. Harrigan, wounded in the shoulder, tried to make a last stand, but Nayeli emerged from the shadows behind him, her father's rifle pressed to his back. For my people, she said quietly. For my father. For my mother. For all those you killed at Burden Creek. Wait, Ethan called out. Don't kill him. Nayeli's finger trembled on the trigger. He deserves death. Yes, Ethan agreed. But he deserves more than that. He deserves to face justice, to have his crimes exposed, to lose everything he built on blood. For a long moment, Nayeli stood frozen. Then slowly she lowered the rifle. You're right, death would be too easy. They tied up Harrigan and his surviving men. As the sun rose, fully painting, the desert gold dust appeared on the horizon again. This time it was Marshal Ellery returning with a full cavalry unit from Fort Buchanan. The trials that followed were sensation in the territory. Harrigan's wealth couldn't buy his way out of federal charges. The massacre at Burden Creek, documented in his own hand, condemned him. He was sentenced to hang ironic justice for a man who'd tried to hang 3 innocent women. His ranch was seized, his assets distributed to surviving Apache families. Some of the land went to the reservation, expanding its boundaries. The ranch Ethan had bought for $35 was confirmed as his free and clear. But the real victory came later as Ethan and the sisters stood at the hidden entrance to the underground water. They decided to reveal it, but with conditions. The water would be shared, the Apache would have full access for their ceremonies and needs, while Ethan would use some for irrigation, turning the ranch into productive land. "Your father would be proud," Ethan told the sisters. "You protected his secret and used it to rebuild." "He would be surprised," Naeli corrected, "that a white man stood with us, that justice, however imperfect, was served." Crowfeather's band helped build new structures on the ranch, a proper barn to replace the burned 1 additional rooms on the house. The sisters stayed, having nowhere else to go and, surprisingly, no desire to leave. "This was our land once," Soha explained. "Now it can be again in a different way." "Partners," Ethan offered, extending his hand. "Partners." All 3 sisters agreed, shaking on it. The ranch prospered. The hidden water, carefully managed, turned 40 acres of scrubland into an oasis. Crops grew where once only sage and cactus survived. Cattle grazed on grassland that stayed green even in drought years. But more than that, it became a symbol, a place where Apache and white could work together, where justice had prevailed against odds, where $35 had bought not just land, but a chance for redemption. Ethan never forgot that morning when he'd ridden up to find 3 women hanging from his gate. It had been the worst possible welcome to his new home, but also in a strange way the best. It had given him purpose again, something to fight for besides his own survival. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of fire, Tiva asked him, "Do you regret it?" Everything that happened. Ethan thought about Crowley dead in the dust, about the nights of gunfire, the thirst, the fear, about Harrigan's threats, and the violence that had stained his new beginning. "No," he said finally. "I came here looking for peace. I found something better." "What's that?" Soha asked. "A reason to fight for peace, and people worth fighting alongside." Naeli smiled, that rare, genuine expression that transformed her face. "Our father had a saying, 'The earth does not belong to us. We belong to the earth. All things are connected like the blood that unites one family.'" "We're a strange family," Ethan observed. "The best families often are," Tiva replied. As darkness fell, they could hear the water running through the new irrigation channels, bringing life to the desert. Somewhere in the distance, coyotes howled their ancient song. The land that had seen so much death was healing, growing, becoming something new. The ranch gate where the sisters had hung now bore a new sign, 3 Sisters Ranch, partners in the land. Below it in Apache and English, both words that Naeli had chosen: from suffering, strength; from injustice, justice; from death, life. Ethan had bought 40 acres of Arizona scrubland for $35. He'd gotten infinitely more than his money's worth. He'd found a home, a purpose, and a family, forged in the crucible of violence, but tempered by justice and mutual respect. The war had taken everything from him: his brothers, his parents, his innocence. The frontier had given him a second chance, though it had come wrapped in blood and cordite smoke. But perhaps that was fitting. Perhaps redemption was never meant to be easy or clean. As the stars emerged in the clear desert sky, countless and eternal Ethan Carver sat with his unlikely family and felt something he hadn't experienced in years: peace. Not the empty peace of isolation he'd sought, but the hard-won peace of battles fought and won of right, defended against might of connections forged in the worst of circumstances, becoming the strongest of bonds. $35. It had seemed like such a small amount for such a large piece of land. Now he understood why the land had been so cheap. It came with a blood debt, a history of violence and injustice that had to be faced and defeated. But it also came with something priceless: the chance to stand for something, to make a difference, to prove that the cycle of violence could be broken. The 3 Sisters Ranch would prosper in the years to come. It would become a model for cooperation between Apache and white settlers, a place where both cultures could coexist and learn from each other. The underground river would flow for generations, carefully managed, never exhausted, a resource shared rather than hoarded. But that night, as Ethan drifted off to sleep to the sound of Apache songs drifting on the desert wind, he wasn't thinking about the future. He was thinking about three women hanging from ropes, still fighting to breathe. He was thinking about the moment he'd chosen to cut them down, to stand with them, to fight for them. It had been the best $35 he'd ever spent. The morning after that first peaceful night brought unexpected visitors, but not the kind Ethan had learned to fear. A wagon rolled up the dusty trail, driven by a woman with steel-gray hair and a face that had seen its share of hardship. Beside her sat a younger woman, perhaps 25, with intelligent eyes and ink-stained fingers. "Mr. Carver," the older woman called out. "I'm Martha Brennan, and this is my daughter Sarah. We run the Covenant Gazette." Ethan approached cautiously, the sisters watching from the porch. After weeks of violence, any visitor sparked wariness. "If you're here about Harrigan, we're here about the truth," Sarah interrupted, pulling out a notebook. "The whole territory's talking about what happened here. Cole Harrigan's trial, the massacre at Burden Creek, 3 Apache women who survived a hanging. People deserve to know the real story." Nayeli stepped forward, her posture guarded. "The real story? Your people don't want the real story. They want to hear how the savage Indians got what they deserved." Martha Brennan climbed down from the wagon with surprising agility. "Some people, yes, but not all. My husband was killed by land speculators 5 years ago when he refused to sell our newspaper. I know what it's like to stand against powerful men. We want to print your story, if you'll tell it." The sisters exchanged glances, conducting one of their silent conversations. Finally, Soha spoke. "Why should we trust you?" Sarah held up a recent edition of the Gazette. The headline read, "Justice Delayed, the Hidden Crimes of Burden Creek." Below was a detailed account of the trial, sympathetic to the Apache victims. "We've been investigating Harrigan for 2 years, Sarah explained. "No one would talk to us before. Too scared. But now, with him facing the gallows, people are finding their courage." They sat around the kitchen table, coffee cooling in tin cups, as the sisters began their story. Not just about Harrigan, but about their people. Their father, the life they'd known before the massacre. Sarah's pencil flew across the pages, capturing every detail. "Our father was called Joseph Standing Bear." Nayeli began, her voice steady but distant, as if seeing into the past. "He was the keeper of the water secret passed down through 7 generations. When the white settlers first came, he tried to make peace. He believed we could share the land." "What changed?" Martha asked gently. "Cole Harrigan changed everything," Tiva said bitterly. "He came with promises of trade, of partnership. Father even showed him some of the outer springs, the ones we used for the cattle. But Harrigan wanted more. Always more." Ethan listened, learning details the sisters hadn't shared before. How Harrigan had tried to marry Nayeli to get the secret through family bonds. How their father had refused seeing through the deception. How the rejection had turned Harrigan's greed into rage. The night of the massacre. Soha continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Father knew they were coming. He'd seen the riders gathering, the weapons being prepared. He sent us away with our mother, and the other women and children told us to run for the reservation. But Mother wouldn't leave him." "She went back?" Nayeli said, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face. "We found her body 3 days later, along with the others. 27 people, including 8 children. Harrigan's men didn't spare anyone who stayed." Sarah had stopped writing, her face pale. "Dear God, and the authorities did nothing." "Sheriff Daniels helped bury the bodies," Tiva said with bitter irony. "Called it an Indian uprising that had to be put down. The territorial governor believed him or pretended to." Martha reached across the table to grasp Nayeli's hand. "We'll print every word, every name. Let the whole territory know what really happened." But even as they spoke of justice and truth, danger was stirring. Harrigan might be in federal custody awaiting trial, but his influence ran deep. That evening, as the Brennan women prepared to leave, riders appeared on the horizon. Not many, just 3, but their intent was clear in their cautious approach. "Trouble," Ethan muttered, reaching for his rifle. The lead rider raised his hands as he approached, showing empty palms. He was a thin man with the look of a lawyer or accountant, not a gunman. Mr. Carver, I'm Thomas Garrett, attorney at law. I represent certain interests that were allied with Mr. Harrigan. If you're here to threaten us, Ethan began. Quite the opposite, Garrett interrupted. I'm here to make you an offer. My clients are businessmen, Mr. Carver. With Harrigan gone, they see an opportunity for a new arrangement, one that could benefit everyone. Nayeli appeared beside Ethan, her father's rifle in her hands. We don't make deals with murderers. Garrett adjusted his spectacles nervously. The men I represent had no part in the massacre, I assure you. They were Harrigan's business partners, not his killers. They're interested in the water rights, yes, but they're prepared to pay. Handsomely. How handsomely? Sarah Brennan asked, her journalist's instincts engaged. $50,000, Garrett said, and even Ethan couldn't hide his surprise. It was more money than most people saw in a lifetime. Plus guaranteed access for Apache ceremonial purposes and employment for any of your people who want it. The silence stretched long. $50,000 could transform everything. The sisters could build schools, buy land, help their scattered people rebuild. Ethan could expand the ranch into an empire. It was a fortune by any measure. No, Tiva said firmly, and her sisters nodded agreement. You haven't even considered, Garrett began. There's nothing to consider, Soha interrupted. The water is sacred. It's not for sale, not for any price. Garrett's friendly demeanor cracked slightly. Ladies, Mr. Carver, please be reasonable. The men I represent aren't as patient as I am. They've made a generous offer. It would be wise to accept. That sounds like a threat. Ethan observed his hand moving to his pistol. It's a reality, Garrett replied. Harrigan's gone, but the desire for that water isn't. You can deal with civilized businessmen who'll honor an agreement, or you can wait for the next Harrigan to come along. And he will come, Mr. Carver. Men always do when there's fortune to be made. After Garrett and his companions left the group, sat in troubled silence. Martha Brennan was the first to speak. He's not wrong. The water's too valuable to stay secret forever. Then we make it public, Sarah suggested suddenly. Print the location in the newspaper. Let everyone know. If it belongs to everyone, no one can kill for it. It would be chaos, Ethan pointed out. Every desperate farmer and rancher for 100 miles would come. They'd drain it dry in a year. Then what do we do? Tiva asked. Keep fighting off whoever comes next. The answer came from an unexpected source. The next morning, Crowfeather returned with several Apache elders' men who'd known the sisters' father. They brought with them an ancient treaty once signed before Harrigan's time, before the territory was even American. This is from the Spanish crown, the eldest, a man called Robert Two Rivers, explained. It grants water rights to our people in perpetuity. It was honored by the Mexican government and by law should be honored by the American government too. Should be and will be are different things, Ethan said carefully. True. Two Rivers agreed, but with the right lawyer, with public attention from the newspaper, with the federal marshal's support, it might be enough. They spent days preparing their case. Sarah Brennan wrote article after article building public sympathy. Martha used her connections to find a lawyer in Tucson who specialized in Spanish land grants. Marshal Ellery, who'd returned to check on them, agreed to testify about the water's importance to preventing further violence. But the peaceful legal approach was interrupted by violence, as they'd all feared it would be. It started small cut fence lines, poisoned cattle shots fired at night to terrorize rather than kill. Garrett's businessmen were losing patience. They're trying to wear us down, Nayeli observed after the third night of harassment. Make us so tired and scared we'll take their money just for peace. My father tried that, Ethan replied, repairing another cut fence. Gave in to threats sold out cheap. He regretted it the rest of his life. I won't make the same mistake. The attacks escalated. A group of hired guns tried to ambush Soha when she went to check the irrigation channels. Only her knowledge of the terrain and Crowfeather's warrior's intervention saved her. 2 nights later, fire arrows landed on the ranch house roof. They managed to douse the flames, but the message was clear: surrender or burn. We need to take the fight to them, Tiva argued. Find out who these businessmen are, expose them like we exposed Harrigan. Sarah Brennan had been investigating exactly that. 3 names keep coming up, she reported. Samuel Morrison, who owns the largest bank in Tucson, Richard Townsend, who controls most of the territorial freight lines, and James Whitmore, who has contracts to supply water to the railroad construction. They formed a syndicate to develop what they call underutilized resources. Meaning our sacred sites, Nayeli said bitterly. We need proof they're behind the attacks, Ethan said. Otherwise, they'll claim they're legitimate businessmen being slandered. The proof came from an unexpected source. One of the hired guns gut shot in a failed night raid lived long enough to talk. Whether from pain, fear of dying with sins unconfessed, or simple spite at being abandoned by his employers, he gave them everything. Morrison paid us, he gasped, blood frothing on his lips. $100 a week to make trouble. Townsend arranged the supplies. Whitmore's the worst. He's got plans for that water. Gonna pipe it all the way to the railroad, sell it by the gallon. Sarah wrote it all down, the dying man's confession witnessed by Marshal Ellery and 2 cavalry officers. It was enough for arrests, but Morrison, Townsend, and Whitmore had something Harrigan hadn't: smart lawyers and political connections. They'll tie this up in court for years, Ellery warned. Meanwhile, they'll keep sending men. Then we need to make it too costly for them to continue, Ethan said. He'd been thinking about this, remembering tactics from the war. They're businessmen. Hit them where it hurts their profits. The plan was audacious. Using the Spanish treaty and the water rights it granted, they filed an injunction against all 3 men's businesses, claiming they were operating on illegally seized Apache land. It was a long shot legally, but it created something businessmen feared more than bullets: uncertainty. Every day this is in court, their investors get nervous, the Tucson lawyer explained. Stock prices drop, loans get called, and contracts get canceled. They can afford hired guns, but can they afford to lose millions? The answer became clear within a week. Morrison's bank suffered a run when depositors worried about legal liability. Townsend lost a major freight contract when competitors spread word of his Indian troubles. Whitmore's railroad deal was put on hold pending resolution of the water rights issue. Garrett returned this time without the pretense of friendliness. You're destroying legitimate businesses with these spurious claims. Spurious? Nayeli laughed. Your clients hired men to burn our home. That's attempted murder, Mr. Garrett. Alleged, Garrett corrected. The word of a dying outlaw isn't proof. Maybe not, Sarah Brennan interjected, but it makes for compelling reading. My next article details how 3 of Tucson's most prominent citizens might be connected to terrorist attacks on a ranch. I'm sure their society wives will find it fascinating. Garrett's face flushed. What do you want? Recognition of the Spanish treaty, Ethan said. Full Apache water rights. And your clients sign a document acknowledging they have no claim and will make no future claim to this land or its resources. That's extortion. That's negotiation, Martha Brennan corrected. Your clients tried violence and it failed. Now they can try law, or they can try leaving us alone. Their choice. The negotiation took 3 days. Lawyers arrived from Tucson and Phoenix, documents were drafted and redrafted. The sisters insisted on specific protections: the water could never be sold. Commercially, access for Apache ceremonies was guaranteed, and any profits from agricultural use would be shared with the reservation. This is unprecedented, Whitmore complained during one heated session, giving Indians control over such a valuable resource. The alternative is unprecedented too, Ethan pointed out. 3 prominent businessmen going to federal prison for conspiracy to commit murder. Your choice. In the end, pragmatism won. The syndicate signed the agreements, withdrew their claims, and publicly acknowledged the Apache water rights. It wasn't everything. The men who'd actually attacked the ranch disappeared into the desert, never to face justice, but it was more than anyone had expected. The signing ceremony was held at the ranch with Marshal Ellery, the Brennan Women Crow Feathers Band, and even some curious townspeople attending. As Morrison, Townsend, and Whitmore put their names to the documents, Nayeli spoke. My father believed in the law, she said. He thought papers and promises would protect our people. He was wrong. Then the law was a weapon against us. But today, maybe it can be a shield. Not because the law has changed, but because we've learned to use it. After the businessmen left considerably poor and thoroughly chastened, the real work began. The water rights were one thing, but developing them responsibly was another. Ethan and the sisters formed a formal partnership registering it with the territory. They brought in Apache workers from the reservation teaching them modern irrigation techniques while learning traditional water management in return. The first harvest was modest but symbolic corn and beans grown with sacred water shared between Apache and white alike at a feast that brought together communities that had been enemies for a generation. Marshal Ellery attended, as did the Brennans, and even some of the townspeople who'd once supported Harrigan. "My husband would have been proud," Martha Brennan told Ethan as they watched Apache and white children playing together by the irrigation channels. "He believed journalism could change the world. Today, I think he was right." But success brought new challenges. Word of the water spread despite their attempts to control it. Desperate farmers appeared regularly begging for access. Some offered money, others threatened lawsuits, a few tried to take by force what they couldn't get by asking. "We need rules," Soha suggested after the third such incident in a week. "Clear policies about who gets water and how much." They developed a system emergency water for anyone in dire need but no commercial sales. Families could apply for agricultural allotments, but they had to agree to sustainable practices and contribute labor to maintaining the irrigation system. It wasn't perfect, but it was fair. The ranch itself was transforming. What had been 40 acres of scrubland was becoming an oasis. Adobe houses were built for the Apache workers who chose to stay. A school was established where both Apache and English were taught. The old barn was rebuilt larger than before, and a meeting hall was added where both communities could gather. But the past wasn't done with them. On a cold December morning, a lone rider approached a young man, maybe 20, with Harrigan's eyes and chin. He stopped at the gate where his father had hung the sisters. "I'm Cole Harrigan, Jr.," he announced when Ethan met him. "I've come to see the women my father tried to kill." Ethan's hand went to his gun, but the young man raised his hands. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for understanding. I need to know why. Why my father did what he did. Why it all ended like this." The sisters agreed to meet him, though Tiva kept her rifle close. Young Harrigan was different from his father. There was uncertainty in his eyes where the elder had only shown arrogance. "Your father wanted the water," Nayeli told him simply. "He was willing to kill for it." "But why?" the young man pressed. "We had money-land cattle. Why did he need more?" "Because some men are never satisfied," Soha said. "They see what others have and must possess it not because they need it, but because they can't bear others having it." Young Harrigan was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out a leather journal. "This was my father's, his private thoughts. I've been reading it trying to understand. He wrote about your father, about Standing Bear." He respected him, even liked him at first. But when Standing Bear refused to give up the secret, father took it as a personal insult. His pride was hurt, and that pride turned to hate. "Pride and hate," Nayeli said softly. "They've killed more people than all the wars combined." "I want to make amends, but," young Harrigan said suddenly. "I know I can't undo what father did, but I inherited his remaining property. I want to sign it over to your people. It's not much, the government seized most of it, but there's 300 acres that border the reservation. It should go back to Apache hands." The sisters were stunned. Even Ethan hadn't expected this. "Why?" Tiva asked suspiciously. "Because I want to be different," the young man said simply. "I want the Harrigan name to mean something other than murder and greed. Maybe it's selfish, but I need to sleep at night without seeing the faces of the people my father killed." The transfer was arranged through lawyers, all proper and legal. The Brennans published the story portraying it as redemption rather than admission of guilt. Young Harrigan left the territory afterward, heading east to study law, he said, to become the kind of man his father should have been. Winter came to the desert, bringing cold nights and occasional frost that sparkled on the irrigation channels like scattered diamonds. The ranch had found its rhythm, Apache and white, working together, sharing labor and rewards. The water flowed steadily but carefully controlled, nurturing life without exhausting the source. On Christmas Eve, they held a celebration that brought together both communities. Apache drums mixed with fiddle music, traditional foods shared space with frontier cooking. Ethan watched from the porch as Nayeli taught Sarah Brennan an Apache dance, while Crow Feather's children played with toys Martha had brought from town. You did something rare, Marshal Ellery told him, joining him on the porch, with a cup of whiskey-laced coffee. You took a situation that should have ended in blood and turned it into something better. I just did what seemed right, Ethan replied. That's the rare part, Ellery said. Most men do what seems profitable or safe. Right is usually neither. As the celebration continued, Soha approached Ethan with an unusual request. We want to honor you in our way. Will you accept? The ceremony was simple but profound. The sisters and the Apache elders welcomed Ethan as a friend of the people, giving him an Apache name, Man Who Stands Between. It meant someone who bridged two worlds, who stood between conflict and peace, between past and future. I don't deserve this, Ethan said, moved by the gesture. Deserving isn't the point, Nayeli told him. You chose to stand with us when you could have walked away. That choice defines who you are. But even in success, challenges remained. The territorial government, pressured by business interests, tried to invalidate the Spanish treaty. A team of government lawyers arrived arguing that Apache water rights had been superseded by American law. This is exactly what we feared, Tiva said angrily. They'll use the law against us again. Not if we fight back, Sarah Brennan said. She'd been researching and she'd found something important. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which ended the Mexican-American War, specifically states that existing property rights must be honored. The Spanish grant is protected by the very treaty that made this American territory. The legal battle went all the way to the territorial Supreme Court. Ethan, the sisters, and their allies traveled to Phoenix to testify. The courtroom was packed with spectators, the case having become a symbol of the larger struggle between Indian rights and American expansion. The sisters testified about their father, their people, the massacre. Ethan spoke about the attempts to steal the water through violence. Marshal Ellery presented evidence of the crimes committed. Even young Harrigan, returned from the East, testified about his father's intentions and actions. The government's lawyers argued precedent and progress, claiming that Apache control of such a valuable resource would hinder the territory's development. But their arguments felt hollow against the weight of testimony about murder and theft. The decision took months. When it finally came, it was split. The court acknowledged the Spanish treaty's validity, but limited its scope. The Apache would control the water, but only for traditional uses. Commercial development would require territorial approval. It's not perfect, their lawyer admitted, but it's better than losing everything. We'll make it work, Ethan said. We always do. The ranch adapted to the new reality. They focused on sustainable agriculture and education, bringing in teachers from both communities. The school became a model for integrated education, with Apache children learning English and math, while white children learned Apache history and culture. Some in both communities resisted. There were Apache who saw any cooperation with whites as betrayal, and whites who saw educating Apache children as waste. But gradually, success spoke louder than prejudice. One of the most vocal critics was Samuel McKay, a rancher who'd been friendly with Harrigan. He arrived one day with a proposition that was more like a threat. You're sitting on a fortune and playing at being noble, he told Ethan and the sisters. Sell me half the water rights, I'll make you all rich, and I'll handle the political problems. The water isn't for sale, Nayeli said firmly. Everything's for sale at the right price, McKay insisted. Don't be fools, you can't hold on to this forever. Too many powerful people want it. We've heard that before, Ethan replied. From Harrigan, from Morrison and his syndicate. They're gone. We're still here. McKay's expression turned ugly. Harrigan was stupid. He used violence too early. Morrison and the others were cowards. They gave up too easily. I'm neither stupid nor cowardly. I'll use every legal means to get that water, and trust me, the law has many tools. He was true to his word. Lawsuits followed claims that the ranch was violating water use agreements, that the Apache were illegally occupying territorial land, that the entire Spanish treaty was fraudulent. Each case had to be fought. Each victory was temporary. He's trying to bankrupt us with legal fees, Soha observed after the fourth lawsuit in 2 months. Then we need to change the game, Ethan said. He'd been corresponding with contacts from his Army days, men who'd gone into politics or business. One of them, now a senator's aide in Washington, had interesting news. There's movement towards statehood for Arizona, he wrote. And with statehood comes federal oversight of water rights. If you can hold on until then, you might get federal protection that no territorial court can overturn. It became a race against time. McKay intensified his legal attacks while they tried to survive until statehood. The Brennans published article after article about the harassment building public sympathy. Crowfeather's ban provided security against the accidents that started happening. Cut irrigation lines, contaminated wells, mysterious fires. The turning point came from an unexpected source. A group of progressive reformers from back east investigating conditions in the territories heard about the situation. They were exactly the kind of educated, influential people who could make a difference. This is precisely the kind of injustice we're fighting against. Their leader, a Boston lawyer named Charles Worthington, declared after visiting the ranch. Indigenous peoples being robbed of their resources by corrupt business interests. We'll make this a national issue. And they did. Stories appeared in Eastern newspapers. Questions were asked in Congress. Suddenly, the Three Sisters Ranch was famous, a symbol of both the Old West violence and the new century's possibility for justice. McKay found himself fighting not just a local battle, but a national campaign. His business partners withdrew, not wanting the attention. His political allies distanced themselves. His lawsuits were suddenly being scrutinized by federal investigators. "You've won," he admitted bitterly when he came to withdraw his last lawsuit. "But don't think this makes you heroes. You're just delaying the inevitable. Progress will come, and it will sweep away your little experiment in cooperation." "Maybe," Ethan agreed, "but not today, and not tomorrow, and maybe if we're lucky and smart and stubborn enough, not ever." The ranch continued to grow and evolve. Young Apache men and women who'd been educated at the school went on to college, becoming teachers, lawyers, and doctors who returned to help their people. White families who'd initially opposed the arrangement saw their children playing and learning with Apache children, breaking down generational prejudices. Ethan found himself changing too. The nightmares from the war faded, replaced by dreams of green fields and flowing water. He learned Apache words and customs while teaching farming techniques he'd learned in Missouri. The man who'd sought solitude had found community. One evening, as sunset painted the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Nayeli found him sitting by the main irrigation channel watching the water flow. "Do you ever regret buying this place?" she asked, sitting beside him. "I bought 40 acres of scrubland," Ethan replied. "I got a home, a purpose, a family. Seems like I got the better end of the deal." "You saved us," Nayeli said quietly. "That first day you could have ridden away. Most men would have." "You saved me too," Ethan replied. "I was dead inside, just going through the motions of living. You and your sisters gave me something to fight for again." "My father would have liked you," Nayeli said. "He believed there were good men among the whites' men who could see beyond race and greed. He died believing that even as Harrigan's men shot him. You've proved he was right." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the water that had caused so much conflict now flowing peacefully, nurturing life instead of ending it. The sound of children laughing drifted from the school, mixing Apache and English voices in innocent harmony. "What do you think will happen when we're gone?" Nayeli asked. "Will all this survive?" "I don't know," Ethan admitted. "But we've planted seeds not just in the ground, but in people's minds. Some will grow, some won't. But the possibility is there now, where it wasn't before." As if to prove his point, Sarah Brennan arrived with news. The territorial legislature just passed a resolution recognizing Spanish and Mexican-era water rights. "It's not binding, but it's a start. Your case set the precedent." "One victory at a time," Soha said, joining them. "That's how change happens." Tiva appeared with a group of children, both Apache and white, who'd been working on a project for school. They'd created a map of the ranch showing how the water system worked with descriptions in both languages. "We want to put it in the meeting hall," one young Apache boy said proudly, "so everyone can see how we share." As the children ran off to hang their map, Ethan reflected on how far they'd all come. The ranch that had been bought for $35 was now priceless. Not for its water, but for what it represented: proof that different peoples could work together, that justice could prevail over greed, that the cycle of violence could be broken. The water continued to flow as stars began appearing in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the desert, coyotes began their nightly song. The land that had seen so much blood and struggle was at peace for now. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, it always did, but tonight there was harmony. We should write it all down, Tiva suggested, the whole story, so future generations know what happened here. Sarah's been doing that, Ethan pointed out. No, our version, Tiva insisted. In our words, our language, both languages, the full truth of how 3 Apache sisters and 1 stubborn white man changed everything. They began that night gathering around the kitchen table with paper and ink telling the story from the beginning, the hanging, the rescue, the battles, the victories. Each added their perspective, their memories, their hopes for the future. As midnight approached and the oil lamp burned low, Nayeli made a final entry. Let it be known that on this land purchased for $35, something worth far more, was built a bridge between worlds, a hope for peace, a proof that people can choose to be better than their fears and prejudices. May those who come after us continue what we've started. They signed their names, Nayeli, Soha, and Tiva, in both Apache and English, Ethan Carver in his steady hand. It was a document of witness, a testament to what was possible when people stood together against injustice. The Three Sisters Ranch stood as a beacon in the desert, its water flowing freely but wisely, its people working together despite their differences. It was a small victory in a vast land full of conflict, but it was real and it was theirs. The document they'd signed that night would prove more important than any of them realized. 2 weeks later, a federal inspector arrived unannounced, part of the government's investigation into territorial water rights before statehood. He was a thin, meticulous man named Harrison Clark, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a reputation for incorruptibility. I need to see all documentation regarding water rights and usage. He announced, setting up his papers in the meeting hall. Every agreement, every contract, every historical claim. Ethan and the sisters exchanged worried glances. Federal attention could be either salvation or disaster depending on Clark's intentions. They gathered their documents, the Spanish grant, the court decisions, the agreements forced from Morrison's syndicate, and their own recently written testament. Clark spent 3 days reviewing everything, interviewing ranch workers, inspecting the irrigation systems. He spoke with Apache elders and white farmers alike, taking copious notes in his leather-bound journal. On the 3rd evening, he requested a private meeting with Ethan and the sisters. This is highly unusual, he began, adjusting his spectacles. In 20 years of government service, I've never seen anything quite like what you've built here. Unusual good or unusual bad? Tiva asked bluntly. Clark almost smiled. That remains to be determined. You've created a functioning partnership between Apache and white settlers, something the government has been trying and failing to achieve for decades. But you've also concentrated control of a vital resource in very few hands. Apache hands, Nayeli said. That's the real problem, isn't it? For some in Washington, yes, Clark admitted with surprising honesty. But there are others reformers who see this as a model for future policy. The question is, can it survive political scrutiny? Before anyone could respond, gunfire erupted outside. Windows shattered as bullets tore through the meeting hall. Clark dove under the table while Ethan and the sisters grabbed their weapons, returning fire at muzzle flashes in the darkness. Stay down! Ethan shouted to Clark as he moved to a better position. The attack was coordinated, professional. These weren't random outlaws or drunk cowboys. These were hired killers who knew their business. Nayeli spotted movement near the school and fired, dropping 1 attacker. Soha covered the eastern approach while Tiva protected the water channels. They're after Clark, Ethan realized. Someone doesn't want his report filed. The firefight intensified. Apache warriors from Crowfeather's band joined the defense, their knowledge of the terrain proving crucial. Sarah Brennan, who'd been working late at the ranch's small newspaper office, used her position to spot attackers and call out warnings. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the attack ended. The surviving gunmen melted into the desert night, leaving 3 dead companions behind. In the aftermath, as they tended wounds and assessed damage, Clark emerged from under the table, his face pale but determined. This changes everything, Chet, he said. Someone wants me dead or scared enough to write a negative report. That tells me you're doing something right. They searched the dead attackers, finding something disturbing: federal badges, though Ethan suspected they were fake. One man carried a letter partially burned but still readable. It mentioned stopping the report and was signed with an initial DW. Whitmore, Tarma, Naeli said immediately. He's trying again. But he signed agreements, Clark pointed out. He acknowledged your rights. Men like Whitmore only honor agreements when it suits them, Soha said bitterly. Clark surprised them all by pulling out a revolver from his bag. I wasn't always a bureaucrat, he said. I served in the cavalry before taking this position, and I don't take kindly to being shot at. Mr. Carver, I'll need to extend my stay. There's more investigating to do. The next morning brought unexpected allies. Marshal Ellery arrived with a full cavalry troop, having heard about the attack. With him came someone even more surprising, James Whitmore himself, looking haggard and frightened. It wasn't me, Whitmore said immediately. I know what you're thinking, but I didn't order this. The letter has your initial, Ethan said coldly. My son, Whitmore said miserably. William. He's ambitious. He thinks I've gone soft, that signing those agreements was weakness. He's been meeting with other businessmen planning to reverse everything we agreed to. Where is he now? Marshal Ellery demanded. I don't know. He's cut me off, says I'm not fit to run the family business anymore. He has investors from California, men who see the water as the key to controlling the whole territory. Clark had been listening carefully. Mr. Whitmore, are you willing to testify to this under oath? The older man seemed to age before their eyes. He's my son. Your son tried to kill a federal inspector, Clark said sharply. That's a hanging offense. Cooperation might save his life, if not his freedom. While Whitmore struggled with his decision, other problems emerged. The Apache reservation was being pressured to recall Crow Feather's warriors. Government agents claimed they were violating treaty terms by being armed off reservation land. It's another angle of attack, Crow Feather explained. Remove our defenders, then strike again. We need to go on the offensive, Ethan said. Find William Whitmore and his conspirators before they can regroup. Sarah Brennan had been investigating. William's been recruiting from the mining camps, desperate men who'll do anything for pay, but he's also been courting political support, promising to deliver the water rights to whoever backs him for territorial legislature. He's building a power base, Clark observed, smart if ruthless. They decided to divide their efforts. Ethan and Marshal Ellery would hunt for William Whitmore. The sisters would work with Clark to document everything for his report, and Sarah would publish articles exposing the conspiracy. The hunt for William proved frustrating. He'd learned from his father's mistakes, and Harrigan's downfall, staying mobile using intermediaries, never leaving clear evidence of his involvement. But he made one error: he trusted the wrong person. Marcus Webb, a gunfighter William had hired, was captured trying to sabotage the main irrigation channel. Facing a noose, he proved talkative. William's holed up at the old Garrison mine, he revealed. Maybe 15 men with him. They're planning something big for when the inspector leaves. The old Garrison mine was a failed silver operation 20 miles north, a maze of tunnels and shafts perfect for defense. Ellery wanted to wait for more cavalry support, but Ethan knew delay meant giving William time to escape or attack again. I'll go alone, Ethan said. Sap, scout it out, maybe negotiate. That's suicide, Naeli protested. No, it's strategy. William thinks like a businessman. Maybe we can make a deal. Against all protests, Ethan rode out at dawn. The mine was eerily quiet, but he could sense watchers in the rocks. He stopped just outside rifle range and called out, William Whitmore, I'm Ethan Carver. I've come to talk. A young man emerged from the mine entrance, well-dressed despite the circumstances, with his father's features but harder eyes. The famous Mr. Carver, the man who turned my father into a coward. Your father chose peace over violence. That's wisdom, not cowardice. William laughed bitterly. Peace, he gave away a fortune. That water could make us richer than the railroad barons, and he signed it over to savages and a washed-up soldier. What do you want William really want? The younger man's expression turned calculating. Everything. The water, the land, the power it represents. This territory is going to be a state soon. Whoever controls the water controls the future. And you're willing to kill for it. I'm willing to win, William corrected. Unlike my father, unlike Harrigan, unlike those fools Morrison and Townsend. They all failed because they didn't think big enough. Or maybe they failed because murder and theft don't work anymore, Ethan suggested. The old ways are dying, William. The law is getting stronger. Public opinion matters now. Then I'll buy the law and manufacture opinion, William said. You think you've won, but you've only delayed the inevitable. Their conversation was interrupted by dust clouds on the horizon, cavalry approaching from the south, but also riders from the east. William smiled coldly. Seems we both have reinforcements coming. The eastern riders were William's California investors, 20 hard men armed with modern rifles. The cavalry was Ellery's force, but outnumbered. A Mexican standoff developed 3 groups eyeing each other warily. Then something unexpected happened. James Whitmore arrived alone and unarmed, riding directly to his son. William, stop this madness! Go home, old man, William snarled. You're finished. Yes, I am, the elder Whitmore agreed. But you don't have to be. I've made mistakes, terrible ones. But you can still choose differently. I've made my choice. Then I've made mine. James Whitmore pulled out a document. I've signed over all my remaining assets to the Apache Tribal Council in trust for education and development. You're disinherited, William. The family fortune you're counting on is gone. William's face contorted with rage. You can't. I can and I have. It's witnessed, notarized, and filed. You're fighting for nothing now. The California investors hearing this began backing away. They'd come for profit, not a pointless vendetta. Within minutes, William found himself with only a handful of loyal gunmen facing cavalry and Apache warriors. Surrender, son, James pleaded. It's over. William looked around wildly, seeing his grand plans crumbling. Then with a snarl of fury, he drew his pistol, not at his father or Ethan, but at himself. The shot echoed across the desert, and William Whitmore fell, choosing death over defeat. The aftermath was swift. The remaining gunmen surrendered. The California investors retreated to their own territories, and James Whitmore collapsed in grief over his son's body. Ethan helped carry William back to the ranch for burial, an enemy who died by his own hand rather than admit failure. Clark witnessed it all, adding pages to his report. This is the cost of greed, he said quietly. Father against son community torn apart, all for water. Not just water, Nally corrected. For power. The water was just the means. James Whitmore stayed for his son's funeral, a broken man. Before leaving, he spoke with the sisters. I know apologies mean nothing after all the pain I've caused, but I want you to know the assets I've signed over, use them well. Build something better than what my family destroyed. The gift was substantial shares in transportation companies, bank holdings, real estate in Tucson and Phoenix. Properly managed, it would fund Apache education and development for generations. Why? Soha asked simply. Because my son was right about one thing. Whoever controls resources controls the future. Better it be in your hands than in the hands of men like what I was. Clark's report, when filed, was revolutionary. He recommended federal protection for the Three Sisters Ranch model, suggesting it be studied and potentially replicated across the territories. The report caused fierce debate in Washington, but it also brought attention and protection. The ranch received a federal designation as an experimental cooperative agricultural zone, giving it protection from local political interference. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to ensure stability. With the Whitmore assets and federal protection, the ranch expanded its mission. A proper school was built offering education through high school unprecedented for Apache children. A medical clinic was established serving both communities. The irrigation system was expanded, allowing more families to farm. But success brought new challenges. Some Apache traditionalists saw the modernization as cultural betrayal. Some white settlers resented the Apache success. Tensions simmered, occasionally boiling over into confrontations. One such confrontation involved Thomas Grayhawk, a young Apache who'd been educated at the ranch school but turned against what he saw as assimilation. You're teaching our children to be white, he accused the sisters during a public meeting, forgetting our ways, our language, our spirits. We're teaching them to survive in both worlds, Nayeli responded, to keep our traditions while gaining new tools. Tools of oppression, Grayhawk spat. The white man's education is poison. Ethan started to speak, but Tiva stopped him. This was an Apache matter. She stood commanding attention despite her youth. Our father knew every story, every song, every ceremony of our people, she said. And he died because he couldn't read the papers Harrigan used to steal our land. Knowledge isn't betrayal, ignorance is. We can be Apache and educated. We must be both to survive. The debate continued for hours, but gradually most sided with the sisters. Greyhawk left, taking a few followers, but the majority stayed understanding that adaptation didn't mean surrender. Meanwhile, Sarah Brennan was building the ranch's newspaper into a territorial force. Stories of the cooperative's success spread, inspiring similar attempts elsewhere. Not all succeeded. Many failed when greed or prejudice proved stronger than cooperation, but seeds were planted. One day, a delegation arrived from Oklahoma Cherokee leaders who'd heard about the water rights victory. They spent a week studying the ranch's operations, its legal framework, its careful balance of tradition and progress. You've done something we've been trying to do for decades, their leader Robert Standing Tree said. Found a way to work with whites without losing yourselves. We almost lost everything multiple times, Soha admitted. We're still not sure it will last. Nothing lasts forever, Standing Tree replied. But you've built something that can adapt, that can survive change. That's more than most achieve. The exchange of ideas went both ways. The Cherokee shared their experiences with legal systems, their strategies for maintaining culture while engaging with white society. Alliances formed networks of indigenous peoples sharing knowledge and support. Clark returned 6 months later with news. Congress is considering legislation based on your model, the Indigenous Water Rights Act. It would protect native water claims across all territories and states. Will it pass? Ethan asked. Unknown. The opposition is fierce, but the fact that it's being debated at all is remarkable. That evening, they gathered at the main irrigation channel. Ethan, the three sisters, Crowfeather, Sarah Brennan, Marshall Ellery, and even James Whitmore, who'd returned to see what his gift had helped build. The water flowed steadily, reflecting the sunset in ripples of gold and crimson. My father would be amazed, Nayeli said softly. When he kept the water secret, he thought he was preserving the past. Instead, he preserved the future. Both, Crowfeather corrected. The water connects past and future Apache and white tradition and change. It flows through all, nourishing all. A young girl ran up, Maria, daughter of an Apache mother and Mexican father who worked on the ranch. She spoke 3 languages fluently, moved easily between cultures, embodied the future they were building. Miss Nayeli. Miss Sarah wants to know if you'll tell the water story at school tomorrow. The new children haven't heard it. Nayeli smiled. The water story had become legend, how 3 sisters and a lone rancher stood against greed and violence, how water meant for all was kept from being stolen by few, how cooperation proved stronger than conflict. We'll all tell it, she decided, each from our own view so the children understand that truth has many faces. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He walked the ranch, seeing Apache hogans next to adobe houses, hearing multiple languages drifting from windows, watching the water flow through channels that nourished crops planted by diverse hands. He found himself at the gate where he'd first discovered the sisters hanging. A memorial stood there now, not celebrating violence or victimhood, but marking transformation. The inscription in Apache Spanish and English read, "Where death failed, life prevailed." Soha found him there. Regrets? She asked. No, just thinking about chances. If I'd arrived an hour later that day. But you didn't. That's what matters. She studied the memorial. We've started calling you something in Apache. Want to know what? Ethan nodded. The one who came at the right time. It means someone whose arrival changes everything, who appears exactly when needed. I'm just a man who bought some land, Ethan protested. And we're just 3 Apache women, but together we became something more. A rider approached in the darkness, a young Apache man with urgent news. Railroad surveyors. They're marking a route through the southern part of the ranch. The railroad had been threatening for months. Even federal protection had limits, and the railroad companies had powerful friends in Washington. They gathered in the meeting hall to discuss this new threat. They can't take the land directly. Clark explained he'd extended his stay indefinitely, fascinated by the ranch's evolution. But they can claim right-of-way for national interest. The compensation would be minimal. It's not about compensation, Tiva said angrily. The southern section has our ceremonial grounds, where we bury our dead. Marshal Ellery studied the surveyor's map Sarah had obtained. They have alternative routes. This one's just cheaper because it's flatter. Then we make it more expensive, Ethan suggested. Not with violence, but with law publicity and politics. They launched a campaign that combined all their learned strategies. Sarah published articles about railroad companies desecrating native burial grounds. The Cherokee delegation, still present, used their political connections to raise questions in Washington. Clark added an addendum to his report about the railroad's threat to the successful cooperative model. But the railroad companies were powerful, used to getting their way. They sent negotiators, then lawyers, then less official representatives who made vague threats about accidents and unfortunate fires. The showdown came when railroad workers actually appeared ready to begin construction, despite the ongoing legal challenges. They were met by a human chain Apache and white together elders and children, all standing peacefully but immovably in the railroad's path. This is illegal interference with interstate commerce, the railroad boss, a man named Hutchinson, declared. This is legal protest on our own land, Ethan replied. The standoff lasted 3 days. Photographers from eastern newspapers captured images of Apache grandmothers standing beside white farmers' children of all backgrounds holding hands across the proposed route. The pictures spread across the nation, becoming symbols of resistance against corporate power. Then President Roosevelt himself intervened. The hero of San Juan Hill, the trustbuster, had been following the situation. His telegram was brief but decisive. Find another route. The railroad retreated, grumbling about government interference and Indian lovers. But they retreated nonetheless, their surveyors marking a path that curved around the ranch's boundaries. We've made powerful enemies, Clark warned. Railroad companies have long memories. Let them remember, Nayeli said defiantly. Let them remember that we stood together and won. The victory celebration that night mixed Apache drums with fiddle music, traditional dances with American square dancing. Children played games that borrowed from both cultures, creating something new and unique. James Whitmore, who'd become an unlikely ally, announced he was funding a legal defense fund for indigenous water rights nationwide. My son died believing might makes right, he said. I'll spend what's left of my life proving him wrong. But even in celebration, they knew challenges remained. Statehood was coming, bringing new laws and new pressures. The younger generation, educated in both worlds, faced identity struggles their parents hadn't imagined. The water, while protected for now, would always be coveted. Ethan found himself on the porch with the sisters as the party continued. They'd aged in the years since that first terrible day, as had he. Gray streaked their hairlines, mapped their faces, but their eyes remained fierce with purpose. What happens when we're gone? Tiva asked, echoing Nayeli's earlier concern. The young ones take over, Ethan said, gesturing to Maria and her friends playing a game that seemed to involve both Apache counting songs and American jump rope rhymes. Will they remember why we fought? Soha wondered. They'll remember what we built, Nayeli said. That's what matters. Each generation faces its own battles. We can't fight theirs, but we can leave them strong ground to stand on. A young man approached Thomas, one of the first Apache graduates from the ranch school, now returned from college as a lawyer. Mr. Carver, Miss Nayeli, there's someone to see you, says he's from the Smithsonian Institution. The visitor was Professor Harold Whitman, an ethnologist studying successful cultural preservation. I've heard remarkable things about your ranch, he said. I'd like to document what you've achieved here. Document for whose benefit? Nayeli asked suspiciously. For history, Whitman replied. What you've done here challenges everything my colleagues believe about cultural interaction. You've proved assimilation isn't the only path that cooperation without erasure is possible. They agreed cautiously to let him observe and record. Over the following weeks, Whitman interviewed dozens of people, photographed daily life, recorded Apache songs and stories alongside pioneer tales. You've created something unique, he concluded. Not Apache culture or white culture, but a third thing, a hybrid that honors both while being neither. Is that good or bad? Young Maria asked, having listened to the conversation. That's for you to decide, Whitman said. Your generation will determine if this experiment becomes evolution or footnote. As Whitman prepared to leave with his notes and photographs, he made an offer. The Smithsonian would like to fund a cultural center here, a place to preserve and share what you've built. They discussed it at the community meeting. Some saw opportunity, others worried about becoming a curiosity for Eastern academics. Finally, Greyhawk, who'd returned after his self-imposed exile, spoke. "We've spent so long trying not to disappear," he said. "Maybe it's time to make sure we can't be forgotten." The cultural center was approved, but with conditions: it would be run by the community, would tell their story, in their way, would be education, not exhibition. Construction began just as news arrived that changed everything. Arizona would become a state within the year. The territorial period was ending, and with it, the legal limbo that had both threatened and protected them. Statehood means state water laws, Clark explained. The federal protections might not transfer. Then we'd better make sure the right laws get written, Ethan said. They threw themselves into the statehood process. The sisters testified before the Constitutional Convention. Thomas used his legal training to draft protective language. Sarah mobilized public opinion through her newspaper network. The debate was fierce. Powerful interests wanted water rights tied to land ownership, period. Others wanted all water controlled by the state. The Three Sisters Ranch model was attacked as impractical, un-American, dangerous precedent. But they had allies now, other indigenous groups, progressive reformers, even some businessmen who'd learned that cooperation could be more profitable than conflict. James Whitmore spent his fortune lobbying, arguing that sustainable water management benefited everyone. When the Arizona Constitution was finally ratified, it contained unprecedented language protecting existing water rights and recognizing indigenous claims. It wasn't perfect law, never is, but it was enough to preserve what they'd built. Statehood Day. February 14, 1912 was celebrated at the ranch with particular joy. The American flag rose beside the Apache Nation flag, neither higher than the other. Children sang both the national anthem and traditional Apache songs. "We're Americans now," Maria said proudly. "We always were," her Apache grandmother corrected. "We were here before America was America. Now America has finally caught up to us." Ethan stood with the sisters watching the celebration. They'd survived Harrigan, the Whitmore Syndicate railroad companies, and political pressure. They'd transformed 40 acres of scrubland bought for $35 into a symbol of what America could be at its best. "My father had a vision," Nayeli said, "of water flowing freely but wisely, nourishing all who came in peace. We've made it real." "For now," Ethan said, ever practical. "For now is all anyone gets," Soha replied. "But we've made our now count." As the sun set on Arizona's first day of statehood, the water continued to flow through the channels they'd dug and defended. Children played in its shallows, crops grew in its nourishment, and the desert bloomed with possibility. The Three Sisters Ranch stood as testament to what could be achieved when people chose cooperation over conflict, when justice proved stronger than greed, when water meant for all remained with all. It had cost far more than $35 paid in blood tears, determination, and hope, but it had purchased something invaluable, proof that different peoples could build something together that none could build alone. The story was far from over. New challenges would come with new generations. But that night, as Apache drums mixed with fiddle music under star-filled skies, as water flowed through ancient lands toward an uncertain but hopeful future, the $35 ranch stood as America's promise to itself that out of many one, that from conflict peace, that where death once hung from ropes, life could flourish forever. The celebration of statehood had barely ended when the first test of Arizona's new laws arrived. A consortium of Phoenix businessmen backed by Eastern money filed claim to abandoned water rights throughout the region, arguing that traditional use didn't constitute legal ownership under state law. The Three Sisters Ranch was squarely in their sights. "They're using statehood against us," Thomas explained, reviewing the legal documents, claiming that territorial agreements don't transfer automatically to state jurisdiction. Ethan slammed his fist on the table. "We fought for those protections to be in the Constitution." "And they are," Thomas said. "But constitutions need interpretation, and interpretation happens in courts." The lead plaintiff was Franklin Morrison, nephew of Samuel Morrison from the old syndicate. He'd learned from his uncle's mistakes using law instead of force procedure, instead of violence. He was also young, ambitious, and utterly without scruple. The Apache never filed proper claims, Morrison argued in the Phoenix courtroom. Living on land doesn't make it yours. Using water doesn't create ownership. These are basic principles of American law. Nayeli wanted to respond that Apache law preceded American law by centuries, but Thomas advised restraint. The judge Harold Brennan, no relation to Martha and Sarah, was known to be fair but strict about procedure. Your Honor, Thomas began his defense. We have Spanish grants, Mexican treaties, federal recognition, and now state constitutional protection. How many more documents do we need? Documents that follow proper filing procedure, Morrison interjected, which these don't. The legal battle dragged on for weeks. Sarah Brennan used her newspaper to rally public support, but Morrison had his own press allies painting the Apache as obstacles to progress and prosperity. The narrative was familiar civilization versus savagery dressed in legal language. During a recess, Morrison approached Ethan privately. This doesn't have to be adversarial, he said smoothly. Sell me half the water rights. You'll be rich, the Apache get to keep their ceremonies, everyone wins. Everyone except the next generation, Ethan replied. You drain that aquifer in 20 years. That's 20 years of profit, Morrison said as if that explained everything. And then what? When the water's gone, Morrison shrugged. Then we find new water or people move. That's progress, Mr. Carver. Creative destruction. It's just destruction, Ethan said, and I've seen enough of that for one lifetime. The conversation was interrupted by commotion outside. A group of Apache youth led by Maria and her friends had organized a demonstration. They carried signs reading, "Water is life," in English, Spanish, and Apache. Their peaceful protest drew photographers and reporters, shifting public attention back to the human element of the legal fight. Judge Brennan, influenced perhaps by the public pressure, made an unexpected decision. This court will reconvene at the Three Sisters Ranch. I need to see this water understand its use before I rule on its ownership. The convoy that arrived at the ranch 2 days later was impressive lawyers, clerks, reporters, and curious citizens. Judge Brennan, a methodical man with penetrating eyes, insisted on seeing everything: the irrigation systems, the ceremonial grounds, the school, the cooperative farms. At the sacred spring, where the Apache held ceremonies, Greyhawk was waiting with the elders. He spoke directly to the judge, ignoring Morrison's lawyers. Your Honor asks about ownership, Greyhawk said. But you can't own water any more than you can own wind. You can use it, share it, protect it, but own it. That's like saying you own time itself. Poetic, Morrison said dismissively, but not legal argument. Isn't it? Judge Brennan asked thoughtfully. Mr. Greyhawk raises a fundamental question. What exactly are we claiming ownership of the water molecules? The right to access, the underground channels. As the legal teams argued philosophy and precedent, something else was happening. The ranch's residents, Apache and white alike, went about their daily work demonstrating without words what the water meant. Children attended school, farmers tended crops, elders taught traditional crafts, all sustained by the carefully managed water. That evening, Judge Brennan requested something unusual. I want to hear the story, not the legal history, but the human story. How did this place come to be? Nayeli and Ethan took turns telling it, starting with that terrible day of the hanging. Soha and Tiva added their perspectives. Even James Whitmore, who'd come to observe the proceedings, spoke about his son and the cost of greed. Morrison's lawyers objected repeatedly. This wasn't proper testimony, wasn't relevant to legal ownership. But Judge Brennan overruled them. I'm trying to understand not just the law, but the justice. Continue. Young Maria was the last to speak, unbidden, but unstoppable. I don't understand why Mr. Morrison wants our water, she said. There's enough for everyone if we're careful, but if he takes it, makes it private, some will have too much and others none. How is that American doesn't America mean everyone gets a chance? The courtroom fell silent. Morrison started to speak, then stopped, perhaps realizing that arguing with a child would make him look worse. That night, while the legal teams prepared final arguments, crisis struck. The main irrigation channel was dynamited, flooding the cooperative fields and threatening the school. As everyone rushed to contain the damage, Morrison's men stood aside, claiming they couldn't interfere with potential evidence. But Judge Brennan rolled up his sleeves and joined the effort to save the crops. Evidence be damned, he said. These are people's livelihoods. Working through the night, the community managed to redirect the water and save most of the fields. By dawn, exhausted and mud-covered, they'd turned disaster into mere setback. The judge, cleaning mud from his face, looked at Morrison with disgust. "Did you know about this?" "I have no idea what you're implying," Morrison said smoothly. "Probably Apache sabotage to gain sympathy." Greyhawk had to be physically restrained from attacking Morrison, but it was Crow Feather who spoke with deadly calm. "In the old days, we'd have staked you to an anthill for such lies. Be grateful we've become civilized." The next day's proceedings took place in the meeting hall, Judge Brennan having declared the formal courtroom unnecessary. His ruling, when it came, was unprecedented. "The law speaks of ownership," he began, "but justice speaks of stewardship. The Three Sisters Ranch represents something new in American law: collective stewardship, based on historical use, cultural significance, and sustainable management. Mr. Morrison seeks to impose a narrow definition of ownership that would destroy what's been built here." Morrison's lawyer interrupted. "Your Honor, respectfully, the law is clear." "The law is what we make it," Judge Brennan said firmly. "And Arizona, as a new state, has the opportunity to make new law. I rule that the water rights of the Three Sisters Ranch are held in perpetual trust, managed jointly by the Apache Tribal Council and the Ranch Cooperative, unable to be sold or transferred except by unanimous consent of all stakeholders." Morrison exploded. "This is judicial activism. I'll appeal." "That's your right," the judge agreed. "But consider this, Mr. Morrison. You could spend years and fortunes fighting this, making enemies of people who could be allies. Or you could join them, invest in the cooperative profit from sustainable development. Your choice." Morrison stormed out, his lawyers trailing, but one young attorney lingered, approaching Thomas. "Your argument about collective stewardship," he said. "It could revolutionize water law across the West." "That's the idea," Thomas replied. With the immediate legal threat resolved, the ranch focused on rebuilding the damaged irrigation and implementing Judge Brennan's ruling. A formal trust was established with representatives from the Apache, the white settlers, and surprisingly, the Mexican families who'd been quietly part of the ranch's success. Sarah Brennan published the judge's full ruling, which was picked up by papers nationwide. Letters poured in from other communities facing similar struggles, seeking advice and inspiration. The Three Sisters Ranch had become more than a local success. It was a symbol of possibility. But symbols attract both followers and enemies. Morrison, true to his threat, appealed to the state Supreme Court. He also began a propaganda campaign, painting the ranch as a communist experiment, a threat to American values and property rights. "We need allies," Ethan said during a strategy meeting. "Political ones." The answer came from an unexpected source. Theodore Roosevelt himself, no longer president but still influential, announced he would visit the ranch as part of his Western tour. The hero of San Juan Hill, the trustbuster. The champion of conservation wanted to see this experiment in cooperative resource management. The preparation for Roosevelt's visit consumed weeks. The entire ranch was cleaned and repaired, presentations were prepared, and security was arranged. Morrison's threats had grown increasingly violent in tone. On the day Roosevelt arrived, the ranch had never looked better. The former president, still vigorous despite his years, insisted on seeing everything. He rode the irrigation channels with Ethan, visited the school with the sisters, attended a ceremony with the Apache elders. "Bully," he exclaimed after watching the children perform a play about the ranch's history, mixing Apache legends with frontier tales. "This is America at its finest, diverse people united in common cause." That evening, at a feast combining Apache Mexican and American dishes, Roosevelt spoke to the assembled crowd. "I've seen the future here," he declared. "Not the conquest of one people by another, but cooperation. Not the exploitation of resources, but stewardship. This ranch proves that American democracy can embrace all its people." Morrison, who'd come uninvited to challenge Roosevelt, tried to interrupt. "Mr. President, these people are defying basic property rights." Roosevelt rounded on him with famous fury. "Mr. Morrison, I've dealt with your type before. You wrap greed in the flag and call it patriotism. You destroy in the name of progress. But real progress, sir, is what I see here, people building together what none could build alone." The confrontation made national news. Morrison found his support evaporating, his investors withdrawing. Within a month, he'd abandoned his appeal and left Arizona entirely, reportedly heading to California to try his fortune in oil. But even Roosevelt's endorsement couldn't solve all problems. The ranch faced a generational crisis. Many young Apache educated at the ranch school wanted to leave for cities and opportunities. Many young whites felt the same pull. The cooperative model required committed people, and commitment was increasingly rare. Maria, now 16 and brilliant, exemplified the dilemma. Accepted to an Eastern college, she was torn between opportunity and obligation. "I want to learn," she told Nayeli, "but I also want to help our people." "Maybe you help most by learning," Nayeli suggested, "then returning with new knowledge." "But what if I don't return? What if the city changes me?" "Then you'll be changed," Soha said pragmatically. "Change isn't betrayal, child. Forgetting is." A solution emerged from the Smithsonian's Cultural Center, now complete. Professor Whitman proposed an exchange program. Young people from the ranch could study elsewhere with guaranteed positions back home, while students from universities could come learn sustainable agriculture and cultural cooperation. The first exchange brought unexpected participants, children of Morrison's former allies, young people from Philadelphia and Boston. Even a delegation from the Carlisle Indian School came to see alternatives to forced assimilation. Among them was Rebecca Morrison Franklin's sister, nothing like her brother. A trained botanist, she was fascinated by the Apache's traditional farming methods and their integration with modern irrigation. "I'm not my brother," she said when first introduced. "I think what you've built here is miraculous." Her presence caused tension initially, but her genuine interest and expertise gradually won acceptance. She worked alongside Apache elders, documenting traditional plants and their uses, creating a botanical record that would prove invaluable. Romance bloomed unexpectedly between Rebecca and Thomas, the Apache lawyer. It caused scandal in Phoenix society and concern among some Apache, but Ethan and the sisters saw it as another bridge between worlds. "Love doesn't ask permission," Tiva observed. "It just grows like plants toward water." Their wedding, held at the ranch, became another symbol of possibility. Apache ceremonies blended with Christian ones, languages mixed freely, and even Franklin Morrison attended, stiff and uncomfortable, but present, beginning perhaps to reconsider his positions. But all celebrations were shadowed by time's passage. Crowfeather, the old warrior who'd stood with them from the beginning, was dying. On his last day, he gathered the community. "I've lived to see impossible things," he said weakly. "Apache and white as partners, our water protected by law, our children educated but still Apache. I can die peacefully." "Don't talk of dying," Maria pleaded, but Crowfeather smiled. "Death is just another journey. I've had a good life, fought good fights, seen victories I never dreamed possible. What more can a warrior ask?" He passed that night under stars reflected in the irrigation channels he'd helped defend. His funeral brought together hundreds Apache from across the territory. White settlers who'd fought beside him, Mexican families who'd known him as friend. As they lowered him into the earth near the sacred spring, Nayeli spoke. "He was a bridge between old and new, war and peace, what was and what could be. We honor him by continuing his work." The ranch evolved to meet new challenges. The state government, pressed by development interests, kept trying to modify water laws. Each attempt had to be fought using law publicity and sometimes direct action. During one crisis, when the state tried to claim eminent domain over part of the aquifer for a new city development, the entire ranch community, now numbering in the hundreds, marched to Phoenix. The sight of Apache elders, white farmers, Mexican craftsmen, and their children all marching together made powerful television the new medium just beginning to spread across America. "Water is life," they chanted in 3 languages. "Our water, our future." The governor, facing election and bad publicity, withdrew the eminent domain claim. But everyone knew it was temporary victory. The forces wanting the water would never stop trying. A new strategy emerged from an unlikely alliance. James Whitmore, despite his age, had been networking with conservation groups nationwide. He brought together a coalition including the Sierra Club, the Audubon Society, and indigenous rights organizations. "Make the ranch a model," he proposed. "Document everything: water usage, crop yields, cultural preservation, educational outcomes. Prove scientifically what you've proved morally, that cooperative management works better than private exploitation." The scientific study took 2 years, conducted by university teams from across the country. The results were undeniable. The ranch used less water per acre than commercial operations while producing more food, maintaining higher biodiversity, and supporting more families. It's not just sustainable, sir, the lead researcher concluded. It's regenerative. The land is actually improving under their management. Publication of the study coincided with a national drought that devastated commercial farms across the West. While others suffered, the Three Sisters Ranch maintained production through careful management and deep aquifer knowledge. Suddenly, their model wasn't just interesting, it was essential. Delegations arrived from around the world. Japanese farmers studying water management, Israeli kibbutz members comparing cooperative models, African leaders seeking sustainable development strategies. The ranch had become an international symbol. But fame brought new pressures. Some Apache felt their sacred sites were being turned into tourist attractions. Some white settlers resented the constant visitors and scrutiny. The delicate balance that made the ranch work was straining. Ethan, now in his 70s but still sharp, called a community meeting. "We need to decide who we are," he said. "Are we a museum, a laboratory, or a living community?" The debate was fierce but respectful. Finally, young Maria, now returned from college with a degree in law and hydrology, proposed a solution. "We're all three," she said. "We're a museum of what's possible, a laboratory for solutions, and a living community. The challenge isn't choosing, it's balancing." They established new protocols. Visitors were limited and required to contribute through work, teaching, or resources. The sacred sites were protected with only Apache determining access. The cooperative's business operations were separated from cultural preservation activities. It worked mostly. There were conflicts and compromises, successes and setbacks. But the water continued to flow, the communities continued to cooperate, and the ranch continued to prove that different peoples could build something together. One evening, as Ethan sat with the sisters watching another desert sunset, Soha asked, "Did you imagine this when you bought this land?" "I imagined solitude," Ethan admitted. "I got the opposite." "Regrets?" Nayeli asked, though she knew the answer. "Never. I came here to hide from the world. Instead, I helped build a new one." Tiva pointed to the school where children of all backgrounds were putting on another play, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "They don't know how impossible this was. To them, it's just normal." "That's the victory," Ethan said. "When the impossible becomes normal, when cooperation isn't extraordinary but expected." As if to underscore his point, a group of children ran past Apache white Mexican, even a few Chinese from the railroad worker families who'd recently joined the cooperative. They were playing some complex game involving rules from multiple traditions, arguing and laughing in multiple languages, unconsciously embodying everything their elders had fought to achieve. The water caught the last light of day, turning gold, then silver, then dark, but still flowing, still sustaining, still connecting. Somewhere in the desert, coyotes began their ancient song unchanged, despite all the human drama around them. "We should write it down," Ethan said suddenly. "All of it. Not just the big events, but the daily struggles, the small victories, the way ordinary people did extraordinary things." "Sarah's been keeping records," Nayeli pointed out. "Not news records. Our story and our words, for the children and their children." They began that night pulling out paper and ink, each contributing memories and perspectives. As they wrote, more people joined them. Greyhawk with his warrior's perspective, Rebecca with her scientific observations, Thomas with his legal insights, James Whitmore with his story of redemption. The document grew over weeks, becoming not just history, but testament proof that enemies could become allies, that water could unite rather than divide, that $35 could purchase not just land but transformation. As they wrote the final words, Maria asked, "What do we call it?" Ethan looked at the sisters, then at the assembled community, then at the water flowing endlessly through their improvised paradise. "The $35 miracle," he said. "The story of how the cheapest land in Arizona became priceless." They all signed it, dozens of names in multiple scripts, each signature a promise to remember and continue. The document would be preserved in the Cultural Center, copied and shared, read to children and scholars alike. But even as they celebrated this preservation of memory, time continued its relentless flow. Ethan's health was failing. The sisters were aging, the first generation of the ranch's transformation was passing. On his last coherent day, Ethan gathered everyone. "I bought this land seeking an ending," he said, voice weak but clear. "Instead, I found a beginning. Keep beginning. Every day, every generation, keep beginning." He passed that night peacefully, his hand held by Nayeli, surrounded by the family he'd never expected to have. His funeral rivaled crow feathers in attendance. People came from across the nation to honor the man who'd chosen justice over comfort, community over solitude. They buried him next to Crow Feather near the sacred spring where the water they'd all fought for could sing him to sleep. The headstone bore his name and a simple inscription in 3 languages: "He stood between worlds and made them one." The morning after Ethan's burial, the ranch faced its first crisis without him. A telegram arrived from Washington. The federal government was considering a massive dam project that would flood the entire valley, including the ranch, to create a reservoir for Phoenix's growing population. They had 60 days to present their case before Congress. Nayeli held the telegram with trembling hands. At 71, she felt the weight of leadership more than ever. "Ethan would have known what to do," she said quietly. "No," Maria corrected firmly. "He would have figured it out with us. That's what he taught us. No one person has all the answers." Thomas had already begun researching the legal implications. "They're using the Commerce Clause in national security, claiming water storage for defense installations trumps local rights." "Defense installations?" Soha spat bitterly. "It's always some noble excuse when they want to steal from us." The ranch mobilized with remarkable efficiency. Rebecca organized the scientific documentation, proving the aquifer could provide more sustainable water than any surface reservoir. Sarah Brennan, though, in her 60s, now activated her network of journalists nationwide. Maria prepared to travel to Washington with a delegation of youth who'd grown up on the ranch. But their most powerful ally came from an unexpected source: Franklin Morrison. The same man who'd tried to steal their water years ago arrived at the ranch with a briefcase full of documents. "I know you have no reason to trust me," he began, facing hostile stares, "but this dam project threatens my investments too. More importantly, my sister loves this place, and I've learned to respect what you've built." Tiva studied him skeptically. "What are you proposing? An alliance of convenience, if nothing else. I have connections in Congress, influence you need. You have the moral authority I lack. Together we might stop this." Ah. It was Greyhawk who broke the tense silence. "The enemy of my enemy," he said slowly. "Sometimes the world makes strange allies. I say we hear him out." Morrison's information proved invaluable. The dam project was being pushed by a consortium of development companies that stood to make millions from the construction contracts and the land speculation around the new reservoir. They'd been bribing officials and falsifying water shortage reports to create artificial urgency. "It's Harrigan all over again," Nayeli observed. "Different faces, same greed." "But we're different now too," Maria pointed out. "We have proof our model works, allies across the country, and legal precedents. We're not helpless." The delegation to Washington included an unlikely group: Nayeli and her sisters Maria and Thomas Rebecca, and Franklin Morrison, Sarah Brennan, and James Whitmore, now 90, but determined to make one last fight. They also brought 20 young people from the ranch, living proof of what would be destroyed. The train journey east became a moving campaign. At every stop, Sarah had arranged for local reporters to meet them. The young people performed traditional dances at stations, told their stories, showed photographs of the ranch's transformation. By the time they reached Washington, their cause was national news. The congressional hearing was packed. The committee, led by a stern senator from Nevada named Harrison, seemed initially unsympathetic. "Progress requires sacrifice," Harrison stated. "One ranch, however special, cannot stand in the way of water for millions." Maria stood to respond, but Nayeli touched her arm, rising herself with difficulty but dignity. "Senator, I've heard those words my whole life. Progress requires sacrifice. But it's always our sacrifice for your progress. When does it end?" "The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few," Harrison quoted. "Then let me tell you about the many," Nayeli continued. She pulled out a ledger they'd compiled. 800 people live and work on our ranch: Apache, white, Mexican, Chinese. Our sustainable methods provide food for thousands more. Our school has educated 300 children who've gone on to become doctors, lawyers, teachers, engineers. Our water management has been studied and replicated in 12 states and 5 countries. Destroy us, and you destroy a solution to the very problem you claim to be solving. The committee seemed unmoved until Franklin Morrison stood. His transformation from enemy to ally gave his words particular weight. Senators, I once tried to steal this ranch's water. I know the mindset of those pushing this dam because I shared it. They don't care about Phoenix's water needs. They care about profit. I have documents proving it. He produced evidence of bribes, falsified studies, and secret agreements to develop the flooded land after the dam's eventual decommissioning. The committee was forced to call a recess. During the break, a young senator from New York approached them, Franklin Roosevelt, cousin of the former president. I've been following your story, he said. What you've built represents the future I believe in cooperative democracy, not corporate oligarchy. With his support, momentum shifted. More senators began questioning the dam project's necessity. The Army Corps of Engineers was called to testify and admitted under pressure that alternative sites existed but were more expensive. Then came the moment that changed everything. The young people from the ranch had been sitting quietly throughout the hearings. Now one stood Joseph Crow Feather Jr., grandson of the warrior who'd fought beside Ethan. Senators, he began, his voice clear and strong. You speak of progress and sacrifice, but you don't see us. We're not relics of the past or obstacles to the future. We are the future. I'm going to medical school next year, planning to return and serve my community. Maria here is developing new irrigation techniques that could transform agriculture. David Morrison. Yes. Franklin's nephew is studying sustainable engineering inspired by our ranch. He paused, letting his words sink in. Flood our valley, and you don't just destroy buildings and fields. You destroy proof that Americans of all backgrounds can work together, can share resources fairly, can build something better than what came before. Is that really the progress you want? The hearing room erupted in applause from the public gallery. Senator Harrison gavelled for order, but the damage was done. Public opinion had shifted decisively. That evening in their hotel, the delegation anxiously awaited news. James Whitmore, exhausted by the journey, lay on a couch while others paced and planned. We've done all we can, he said weakly. Now we wait and hope. And prepare for the worst, Morrison added pragmatically. If we lose, we need legal challenges ready, alternative proposals, media campaigns. He was interrupted by a knock on the door. Senator Roosevelt entered with a smile. The committee voted. The dam project is dead. They're recommending funding for expanding your sustainable water management model instead. The celebration was bittersweet. They'd won, but James Whitmore's heart gave out that night, the strain finally too much. He died holding Rebecca's hand, smiling, knowing his redemption was complete. They brought his body back to Arizona, where he was buried at the ranch he'd helped save. His will left his remaining fortune to establish the Whitmore Foundation for Sustainable Development, ensuring the ranch's work would continue for generations. Back at the ranch, the victory felt hollow without Ethan, and now Whitmore to share it. But life continued its relentless flow. The government funding brought new responsibilities and scrutiny. Federal inspectors arrived monthly documenting everything, sometimes interfering with delicate cultural balances. One inspector, a rigid man named Patterson, objected to the Apache ceremonies at the sacred spring. Federal property can't be used for religious purposes, he insisted. It's not federal property, Thomas corrected. The funding doesn't change our ownership structure. The funding comes with conditions, Patterson countered. Separation of church and state. It took Maria's legal brilliance to resolve the crisis. She argued that the ceremonies were cultural, not religious, and integral to the water management system's success. The Apache's traditional knowledge passed down through ceremony was essential to understanding seasonal variations and underground flow patterns. You can't separate the culture from the agriculture here, she explained to a review board. They're intertwined like roots and water. The board agreed, but it was a reminder that government support came with government interference. They needed to maintain independence while accepting help, another delicate balance in their collection of balances. As the sisters entered their final years, succession became critical. Nayeli, the eldest, was increasingly frail but mentally sharp. She spent her days teaching young women the stories and songs that contained encoded knowledge about the land and water. Memory is more reliable than documents, she told them. Papers can burn, but stories passed from heart to heart survive. Soha focused on the practical training the next generation in water management, teaching them to read the land's subtle signs, which plants indicated water depth, how soil color revealed mineral content where seasonal channels would form in rare floods. Tiva, always the warrior, trained the young in vigilance. The fight's never over, she warned. Different faces, same greed. Every generation will face its Harrigans, its Morrisons. Be ready. The question of formal leadership was complex. The ranch had evolved into a true cooperative with no single leader, but external entities needed someone to negotiate with, sign documents, represent the community. After much debate, they chose a council system: 3 Apache members, 3 white members, 3 Mexican members, and 3 at-large positions for other communities. Maria was elected to an at-large position, Thomas to an Apache position, Rebecca to a white position, creating continuity with the founding generation. But even as they organized for the future, the past returned to haunt them. A group calling themselves the True Patriots began harassing the ranch, claiming it was a communist experiment undermining American values. They held rallies in Phoenix, demanding the ranch be disbanded and its water privatized. The leader was Marcus Harrigan, grandson of the original Cole Harrigan. Unlike his grandfather, Marcus wrapped his greed in ideology, speaking of free enterprise and American tradition, while secretly backed by development companies that still coveted the water. We defeated his grandfather, Soha said dismissively. We'll defeat him too. But Marcus had learned from history. He didn't use violence or crude legal attacks. Instead, he waged cultural war, turning neighbor against neighbor in surrounding communities, painting the ranch as a threat to their way of life. The harassment escalated. Cattle, poisoned fences, cut workers followed and threatened. But when they reported it, local law enforcement claimed lack of evidence. Marcus had been careful using intermediaries, leaving no trail. The breaking point came when the school was vandalized. Windows, broken walls painted with racist slogans against Apache Mexicans and race traitors who supported them. The children arrived to find their classroom destroyed, their books burned. Maria stood in the wreckage fury building. Enough! We've tried law, tried publicity, tried patience. Time for something else. Violence isn't the answer, Thomas cautioned. Not violence, Maria corrected. Intelligence. She organized what she called the Water Guardians, young people from the ranch who used their education to fight back strategically. They infiltrated Marcus's organization, documented his funding sources, recorded his private conversations where he admitted his true goals had nothing to do with patriotism. Rebecca used her botanical knowledge to prove the cattle poisoning came from plants not native to the area, transported specifically for sabotage. Franklin Morrison leveraged his business connections to pressure Marcus's corporate backers. The decisive moment came when Joseph Crow Feather Jr., now back from medical school, treated a wounded true patriot who'd been abandoned by his fellows after a failed attack. The man, delirious with fever, confessed everything: Marcus's plans. His backers even the location of weapons stockpiles for a planned assault on the ranch. With this evidence, federal marshals finally acted. Marcus was arrested for conspiracy, his organization disbanded, his corporate backers exposed and shamed. At his trial, he showed no remorse, claiming he was a patriot fighting for real Americans. Nayeli, despite her frailty, attended the trial. When Marcus was sentenced to 20 years, she spoke quietly but clearly. Your grandfather thought he could take by force what wasn't his. You thought you could take by lies. Both of you failed because you never understood water flows around obstacles. Finds new paths, persists despite all attempts to stop it. We are like water. We persist. Marcus was led away cursing, but his defeat marked the end of organized opposition to the ranch. The model had proven too successful, too popular, too deeply rooted to destroy. Newspapers nationwide celebrated the victory of America's most successful experiment in democracy. But success brought new challenges. Young people who'd been educated at the ranch were recruited by universities and corporations nationwide. The brain drain threatened the ranch's future. Who would run it when the educated youth left for opportunities elsewhere? Maria proposed a solution at the monthly council meeting. We establish our own college. not competing with existing institutions but complementing them, a place where traditional knowledge and modern science meet, where our young people can get advanced education without leaving. With what money? Someone asked. The Whitmore Foundation federal education grants and something else. Maria smiled mysteriously. Franklin and I have been working on something. Franklin Morrison stood clearly uncomfortable with public speaking but determined. My family's wealth came from exploitation. My uncle, my father, myself, we all tried to take what wasn't ours. I want to make amends. I'm establishing the Morrison Fund for Indigenous Education specifically to support the college Maria's proposing. The amount he named caused gasps, $10 million a fortune by any standard. Why? Greyhawk asked suspiciously. Franklin looked at his wife Rebecca at their children playing with Apache children outside. Because my kids are growing up here. This is their home. I want them to inherit something better than their family's shameful history. I want them to inherit hope. The Three Sisters College, as it came to be called, opened 2 years later. It offered degrees in sustainable agriculture, water management, cultural preservation, and cooperative business management. Students came from around the world, but preference was given to local youth who promised to use their education to serve their communities. Nayeli lived to see the college's first graduation. From her wheelchair, she watched young people receive degrees that combined ancient wisdom with modern knowledge. In her valedictory address, she spoke her last public words. When Ethan Carver bought this land for $35, he thought he was buying solitude. When he cut us down from those ropes, he thought he was just saving 3 women. Neither of us understood we were beginning something that would outlive us all. This college, these graduates, they're proof that from the worst moments can come the best futures. Water your dreams, children. Tend them carefully. They will grow beyond your imagination. She died peacefully a week later, followed within months by her sisters Soa and Tiva, as if they'd waited to see their work complete before joining their ancestors. The ranch mourned, but also celebrated lives, well-lived purposes fulfilled. They were buried beside Ethan Crow Feather and Whitmore, in the cemetery that had become a testament to unlikely alliances and impossible victories. Their shared headstone bore a simple inscription, "They stood against the storm and became the rain." Maria, now in her 40s, found herself the unofficial matriarch of a community that spanned cultures and generations. The weight of it sometimes overwhelmed her, especially when she stood at the graves of those who'd built this place. "I don't know if I'm strong enough," she confessed to Thomas one evening as they watched the sun set over the irrigated fields. "None of them thought they were either," Thomas replied. "But they did what needed doing one day at a time. That's all any of us can do." A new crisis proved his point. Climate change was altering rainfall patterns, threatening the delicate water balance they'd maintained for decades. The aquifer, while deep and substantial, wasn't infinite. Without adaptation, even their sustainable practices wouldn't be enough. The college became a research center, students and faculty working to develop new conservation techniques. They pioneered drip irrigation systems that cut water use in half. They developed drought-resistant crops using traditional Apache varieties crossed with modern strains. They created water recycling systems that captured and cleaned every drop. But the biggest innovation came from an unexpected source. David Morrison Franklin, and Rebecca's son, had inherited his mother's scientific mind and his father's determination to make amends. His doctoral thesis proposed something radical: artificial aquifer recharge using seasonal flood capture. The Apache always knew floods were part of the cycle, he explained to the council. They didn't fight them, but worked with them. We can do the same with modern engineering: capture floodwater, filter it naturally through constructed wetlands, and inject it into the aquifer. It was expensive, technically complex, and politically challenging, but the ranch had something valuable: proof of success. Banks that would never have loaned to the Apache alone now competed to fund the project. The federal government offered grants. Even the state of Arizona, once hostile, provided support. The project took 5 years to complete. When the first managed flood was successfully captured and stored, turning what would have been destruction into preservation, the entire ranch celebrated. They'd once again proved that cooperation and innovation could overcome any challenge. But the world beyond the ranch was changing rapidly. The year was 1950, and America was transforming. The young people were different, less patient with tradition, more eager for modern life, questioning everything their elders had built. Some wanted to abandon the cooperative model for private ownership. Others wanted to preserve everything exactly as it was. The debate threatened to tear the community apart, undoing decades of unity. Maria, now nearing 60, called a gathering at the sacred spring where it had all begun. Representatives from every generation and culture came, from elders who remembered Ethan to children who knew him only from stories. "We stand at another crossroads," Maria began, "as our founders did when they chose cooperation over conflict. The question isn't whether to change is inevitable. The question is how to change while keeping what matters." A young man, grandson of Greyhawk, stood up. "What matters? The old ways are dying. The young don't want to farm or ranch. They want to be engineers, doctors, artists. Why hold them here?" An elder responded angrily about tradition and respect. And soon everyone was arguing the careful unity fracturing along generational and cultural lines. Then a child's voice cut through the noise. It was Sarah Maria's granddaughter, all of 8 years old. "Why are you fighting about water?" The adult stopped, confused. Sarah continued with the child's clarity. "Great-grandmother Nayeli said water flows around obstacles. It doesn't stop being water when it goes around a rock. Why do we have to stop being us when we change?" In her simple words was profound wisdom. The ranch didn't need to be frozen in time or abandoned to progress. It needed to flow like water, adapting while maintaining its essential nature. The solution came through evolution, not revolution. The cooperative expanded beyond agriculture into technology, medicine, and arts, all informed by the same principles of sustainability and community. Young people could pursue modern careers while contributing to the ranch's mission. The medical clinic became a regional hospital, blending traditional healing with modern medicine. The school became a model for multicultural education teachers coming from around the world to learn their methods. The water management system became a consulting company helping other communities develop sustainable practices. By 1960, as America convulsed with civil rights struggles, the Three Sisters Ranch stood as proof that integration and equality were not just possible but profitable, not just moral but practical. Journalists called it the town that solved racism, though residents knew it was more complex than that. "We didn't solve racism," Maria told a visiting reporter. "We just chose to be bigger than it. Every day we choose cooperation over conflict, community over division. It's not a solution, it's a practice." That practice was tested when the state tried to build a highway through the ranch, claiming eminent domain for interstate commerce. Once again, they mobilized legally, politically, culturally. But this time, they had something their founders hadn't: precedent and power. The ranch's alumni included state legislators, federal judges, and successful business people. When Arizona tried to take their land, they found themselves fighting not just a local community, but a nationwide network of influence. The highway was rerouted, but the fight revealed a new reality. The ranch was no longer David facing Goliath. It had become its own form of power, able to protect itself and even expand its influence. They used that power carefully but effectively. When neighboring communities faced water crises, the ranch shared expertise and resources. When indigenous communities elsewhere fought for rights, ranch lawyers provided free representation. When sustainable development was discussed nationally, ranch experts testified before Congress. Maria lived to see the ranch's centennial in 1976, marking 100 years since Ethan had bought the land for $35. The celebration brought thousands, descendants of founders, alumni from around the world, dignitaries, and common folks alike. Standing where the gate had once held 3 hanging women, Maria, now 90, spoke to the assembled crowd. "A century ago, a broken man bought this land seeking solitude. He found 3 dying women and made a choice that changed everything. Not a grand choice, just a human one, to cut the ropes, to stand with the vulnerable, to choose justice over comfort. Every great thing that followed came from that simple choice." She paused, looking at the sea of faces every color, culture, and creed represented. We tell this story not to glorify the past, but to inspire the future. Each generation faces its ropes to cut its stands to make. The details change, but the choice remains. Will you stand with others or stand alone? As the crowd dispersed, children ran through the irrigation channels, as children always had, their laughter echoing across the desert. The water flowed as it had for a century, carefully managed, equally shared, sustaining all who came in peace. The sacred spring still bubbled from the deep aquifer, its location no longer secret, but protected by community rather than secrecy. The school still taught in multiple languages, preparing children for a world that needed bridge builders more than ever. The land still produced food and knowledge, beauty and hope. In the cemetery, the founders rested beneath monuments that told their story. Apache sisters who survived hanging to build a future, a Confederate veteran who chose reconciliation over revenge, businessmen who found redemption in cooperation, warriors who won through peace. But the truest monument wasn't stone. It was the living community that proved every day that people could choose to be better than their fears, bigger than their prejudices, stronger together than apart. It was children playing across cultures, families farming across traditions, students learning across differences. As the sun set on the centennial day, painting the desert in eternal shades of gold and crimson, the water continued its patient flow. It had outlasted conquest and resistance, greed and violence, seeing human drama as merely seasons in its longer story. The $35 purchase had become priceless not through inflation or development, but through transformation of land, of people, of possibility itself. What started as one man's escape had become humanity's example proof, written in water and blood cooperation and conflict, that the American dream could embrace all Americans. The story would continue with new chapters and new challenges, but the foundation was set deep as the aquifer itself, where water is shared, life flourishes. Where people stand together, miracles become commonplace. Where justice flows like water, the desert blooms eternal.